I bought a fancy condo near the train station. Wait, what? What are you talking about? Why are you bringing this up out of nowhere? And not just any condo, he bought it. It's amazing, the view is beautiful, and the rooms are spotless, he said like it was no big deal. I was confused. It turns out, while I was staying at my parents' house, he sold our current apartment and bought the condo behind my back. Then, he moved in without even telling me. No way, where did you get the money for this? I was panicking, but he stayed calm and smug. Oh, I used the money from selling our apartment to make the down payment, he said. What? And by the way, I'm going to live here with mom and dad. I don't need a freeloader like you hanging around. He decided, without asking me, to live with his parents and kick me out of the picture. I was so shocked I didn't even know what to say. My name is Lily, I'm 32 years old, pregnant, and a stay-at-home wife. I'm 8 months along and counting the days until I meet my baby. My husband, David, is 35 and works for a big company. We've been married for 3 years, and I was overjoyed when I finally got pregnant. We'd been trying for a while, but at the same time, I was nervous about my first pregnancy and childbirth. To relax, I visited David's parents' house often. Lily, you're going to be a mom soon, how does it feel? Honestly, it doesn't feel real yet, I'd reply with a nervous smile. The one asking was Rachel, the wife of David's brother, Ethan. She's the reason I enjoyed going to my in-laws' house. I didn't talk much to Ethan, but Rachel and I became good friends. She's a stay-at-home mom too and lives with my in-laws. David's mom started having trouble walking 2 years ago, and the family was worried about leaving her alone during the day, so Rachel, who used to work as a caregiver, stepped in to help. She's kind and didn't hesitate to take care of her. Even though my mother-in-law only needs a cane sometimes, Rachel does a lot to support her. I admire how selfless and quick she was to help. Rachel and Ethan have a 5-year-old daughter, and seeing how Rachel handles motherhood made me feel less nervous about my own pregnancy. She's been a great friend and role model. Time went by, and I had just 1 month left until my due date. I'd been planning this for a while, so I decided to stay at my parents' house to prepare for the baby's arrival. Even though my belly felt heavy, I enjoyed shopping for baby clothes and imagining life with my little one. It was so relaxing to spend time at my parents' home, and it felt refreshing to be back for a longer stay. 2 days past my due date, I started having contractions. I tried calling my husband, Ethan, but he didn't pick up. I also sent him a text, but he didn't reply. At first, I thought maybe he was busy with work or something serious had come up. But as the contractions got stronger, I didn't have time to dwell on it. My focus was completely on bringing my baby into the world. Thankfully, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. When I held her in my arms for the first time, I felt pure happiness. It was like nothing else mattered. Ethan was supposed to be there for the birth, but he never showed up at the hospital. I wanted to confront him, but I was too exhausted, so I just sent him a text letting him know we had a baby girl and then fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up to someone calling my name. Still sleeping? Huh, Ethan? Is it morning already? Come on, Lily, wake up, he said casually. When I opened my eyes, I saw Ethan standing there, with his parents behind him. He smiled and said, "Look, my parents came, you should thank them for coming." I couldn't believe it. I had specifically told Ethan I didn't want visitors right after giving birth. "Why didn't you reply to me yesterday?" I asked, annoyed. "Well, I had dinner plans with my parents," he said matter-of-factly. "Dinner plans? Are you serious?" He shrugged. "Yeah, we went out for sushi, but I drank a lot, so I figured it wouldn't be a good idea to come here drunk. I didn't want to cause a scene." I stared at him in disbelief. While I was in labor, he was out drinking and eating sushi with his parents? Before I could respond, he asked, "Anyway, where's the baby?" "She's in the nursery, she's healthy and perfect," I replied, trying to keep calm. As soon as I said she, his mother frowned. "A girl? Ugh, what a useless wife." "What did you just say?" I asked, shocked. His father added, "This is pathetic. First Rachel, and now Lily, both of you failed." I felt my blood boiling. How could they say this to me, especially after everything I'd just been through? Then Ethan, instead of standing up for me, sighed and said, "Yeah, I knew it was a girl, but I was really hoping we'd have a boy. My parents were counting on us." I couldn't believe my ears. Disappointed? Counting on us? Why did it matter so much to them? I never thought I'd have to worry about having a son, since Ethan is the second son in his family, but his parents had been hoping for a boy, especially since the first grandchild was a girl. Honestly, I didn't care about that at all. For me, it didn't matter if my baby was a boy or a girl, my child was perfect just the way she was. Ethan should have felt the same, but it was clear he was more interested in pleasing his parents. Even though I was furious, I was still exhausted from giving birth, and I didn't have the energy to argue. A nurse, who had overheard our conversation through the wall, kindly stepped in and asked Ethan and his parents to leave. As I cried, the nurse comforted me. After that, Ethan didn't even bother to visit me at the hospital. Finally, it was time for me and my daughter to leave the hospital. I had my parents come pick us up and decided to go to their house instead of returning to the one I'd shared with Ethan. I couldn't understand why Ethan had become so cold. He used to be more caring when we first got married. What happened to him? Maybe it was because of that big mistake he made at work 2 years ago. He caused a huge loss for the company, but his colleagues covered for him, so he didn't get into trouble. Still, it seemed to completely derail him. He had worked hard to get back on track, but it felt like no matter how hard he tried, his career wasn't moving forward. Maybe that's why he became indifferent about everything, even at home. On top of that, one of his colleagues, someone he'd been better than at work when they first joined the company, became his boss after Ethan's mistake. I think that really bothered him and added to his stress. I thought having the baby might change him, but he didn't even seem to be trying. What would happen to our family in the future? I felt so anxious and overwhelmed. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan called me. "Hey, when are you coming back? You've been at your parents' house for almost a month since the baby was born." I wasn't ready to go back. "I'm sorry, I'll come back soon," I replied, not knowing what to say. It was time to get it together for my daughter and move forward. Just as I was thinking this, I told him, "I've got a lot of baby stuff here, can you come pick us up?" Ethan's response shocked me. "No, you don't need to bring any of that stuff back. Actually, I need to talk to you about something. Maybe I should have told you over the phone instead of making you come back." "What do you mean?" I didn't understand what he was getting at. Then, he told me something even more shocking. "I bought a high-rise condo near the train station." What? What do you mean? Why was he bringing this up now? And, of course, he was the one who bought it. "It's great, it has an amazing view, and the rooms are spotless." "I don't understand," I said, feeling completely confused. He had moved out of our old apartment and into this luxury condo while I was staying at my parents' house. "No way, where did you get the money for this? You can't even get a loan with your salary." While I was freaking out, he didn't even apologize. He just casually said, "I made the down payment by selling our house." It hit me then, there was something else he hadn't told me. "Wait, can you explain this properly? What do you mean you sold our house? Where are your parents living now?" He sounded excited when he answered, "Oh, they're living with me in the condo now." "What?" "I'm going to live with them in this awesome new place. I don't need someone like you around anymore. Get out." Just like that, he decided to move in with his parents and kick me out without even asking me. I was completely speechless. I didn't know where to start. Not only had Ethan suddenly started calling his parents mommy and daddy, but now he was living with them in the condo, and on top of that, he told me to leave, basically demanding a divorce. I just sat there, stunned, while he went on, "You're so cocky just being a housewife. You're nothing without my salary. You've just been lazy lately." "What are you talking about? That was only because of the horrible morning sickness," I shot back. I had been busy until the moment I gave birth, but he wouldn't listen. "Our baby wasn't a boy. You're totally useless. My parents even said it's better to be with a younger woman who can give me a son, instead of someone like you, and they don't want to live with my brother and his wife anymore. I've packed your stuff in a storage room, so go pick it up. Oh, and I've already sent you the divorce papers. You better file them." Then he hung up. I was too shocked to do anything. Why did I marry such a jerk? I felt like I made the worst decision. But then I remembered I had my daughter, and I couldn't stay stuck. I had to stay strong for her. After taking some time to process, I decided I was done with him. I wasn't going to let him control my life any longer. Divorce? Fine, let's see who regrets it more in the end. When I told my parents about everything, they were furious. They promised to help me finalize the divorce as soon as the papers arrived. Once I got them, I signed and filed them. A couple of weeks later, Ethan showed up at my parents' house, angry. Hey, what's going on? Why was so much money withdrawn from my bank account? He slammed his bank book down on the table, shouting. I stayed calm. Don't you know what property division is? What? That's __. The account is in my name. I'm not giving you anything. I was done with him. Do you forget? When your salary dropped because of that stupid mistake at work, I started a side job from home. I contributed just as much as you. It's our shared property. I'm taking my share back. You're joking. I don't believe it. That's when my dad, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. How about we take you to court over this? What? How dare you insult my daughter like this? I feel sorry for her that she had to deal with someone like you. Get out of here. My dad, who was a policeman, scared Ethan enough that he just ran out of the house. From that day on, I managed to break off the relationship with Ethan without much trouble. We also settled everything about dividing our assets. Since then, I've been focusing on raising my daughter at my parents' house. Parenting is getting easier, and most importantly, my daughter is just too cute. I'm living a happy life with my adorable baby girl. A few months later, I started receiving unexpected calls from an unknown number. I kept ignoring them, thinking it was probably work-related, but the calls kept coming, so I decided to pick up. Hello? Hello, Sarah. It was Ethan. What do you want? How are you doing, huh? I don't really want to talk to you about that. Can I hang up now? Wait. Oh, can you come back here? What? I'm having trouble paying the mortgage for the condo. They're going to kick me out. Oh, okay. I'm not surprised. You're out of money, aren't you? Yeah. I ran out of savings. My dad hurt his back, so he had to quit his job. Mom brags to her friends, but she's always complaining. It's a mess. Haha, sounds like your parents. I don't know what to do anymore. It made sense now. He shouldn't have even passed the home loan screening with his salary. I guess he had used his savings, his dad's salary, and a loan to buy the condo. But now, with his dad unable to work and his mom spending all their money, he couldn't keep up with the payments. I found out my bank balance was zero, and I'm being told to leave if I don't pay by next week. Please come back, Sarah. We really loved each other once. After laughing for a moment, I spoke calmly. Give me a break. You just want to take advantage of me whenever it's convenient, don't you? You're counting on my salary and just want someone to clean up after you. No. He fell silent after that. You also called me a parasite, didn't you? Wouldn't I just get in the way if I came back? Well, I didn't mean it like that. As he made excuses, I remembered something else I'd been worried about. By the way, what about Jane and your brother? They've already moved out. They're living together now. My brother got into a fight with Dad when he told him to start living better. Dad lost it and said, I don't want to be told what to do by someone who married a woman who couldn't even give me a son. My brother, who's usually so calm, just exploded and said, I'm cutting ties with you both if you keep making fun of my wife. I see. Your brother seems like a decent person. It's good to know he cares about Jane. Please come back. Sarah, are you serious? Who would want to come back to you? I'm too busy taking care of my daughter. I don't have time for people like you. People like me? By the way, do you really call your parents daddy and mommy? It's so weird to act like that at your age. Please, don't say that. You can still bring our daughter here. What? Wasn't it you who wanted to live with her when you first asked me? I get it. You forgot you even had a daughter. I would never bring my daughter to such a terrible father. Don't ever call me again. If you show up, I'll call the police, and my dad will arrest you. When I said that, I could hear him realize how scary my dad could be. I hung up, blocked his number, and changed mine to avoid any further contact. Not long after, Jane reached out, and we made plans to meet up for the first time in a while. I'm sorry I didn't keep in touch. We actually moved to the countryside, and it took a while to get the internet set up. Jane and her family had moved to a quiet rural area. I went to visit her, and it was such a peaceful town surrounded by nature. I thought it would be a perfect place for my daughter to grow up. She would be happy and healthy in that environment. Later, my brother-in-law told me about Ethan and his parents. They were eventually evicted from the condo and left with debt. Now Ethan is still taking care of his parents, struggling to make ends meet. It was no surprise. Meanwhile, I work from home and live with my parents. I can work from anywhere, so I decided to spend a few days at Jane's house and then head back to spend time with my daughter. When my daughter is older, maybe we can move to the countryside and live close to Jane. I'm excited about the future and the life we're building. Buying a condo while your wife is pregnant, who does that? Maybe if you're rich, but not with a regular income. Either way, I'm glad to be away from that awful husband. I hope Jane and her family continue to live happily together. Thanks for watching to the end. Please subscribe if you liked the story, and I'll see you in the next video.
I never expected to find myself in this mess. One minute I was living the American dream, successful career, handsome husband, and a life that seemed picture perfect. Now I'm sitting in my parents' guest room, wondering where it all went wrong. My name is Emily, and this is how my fairy tale turned into a nightmare. It all started 5 years ago at a friend's barbecue. I was 30, focused on my marketing career, and not looking for love. Then Ethan walked in. "Emily, have you met Ethan?" My friend Sarah's voice cut through the chatter. "He's the architect who designed that new art museum downtown." I turned and found myself face to face with the most captivating man I'd ever seen. Tall, with piercing blue eyes and a smile that could melt ice, Ethan extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Emily," he said, his voice smooth as silk. I fumbled with my drink, nearly spilling it. "Oh, nice to meet you too." We talked for hours that night. Ethan was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. I couldn't believe someone like him would give me a second glance. "You're different from the other women I've met," he told me as the party wound down. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" I said yes, of course. Who wouldn't? Our whirlwind romance was the stuff of movies. Fancy restaurants, weekend getaways, and surprise gifts became the norm. My friends were green with envy. "Girl, you hit the jackpot," my coworker Jen gushed over lunch. "Ethan's like a real-life Prince Charming." I blushed, still not quite believing it myself. "I know, I'm so lucky." 6 months after we met, Ethan proposed. It was a crisp autumn evening in Central Park. He got down on one knee, pulled out a ring that probably cost more than my car, and asked me to be his wife. "Emily, you're the missing piece in my life," he said, his eyes shining. "Will you marry me?" I was so overwhelmed. I could barely squeak out a yes. Our wedding was small, but elegant. Ethan insisted on handling all the details, saying he wanted to make it perfect for me. As I walked down the aisle, I felt like I was floating on air. "You look stunning," Ethan whispered as I reached him at the altar. The reception was a blur of champagne toasts and well wishes. I caught snippets of conversation from the guests. How did plain Jane Emily land a catch like Ethan? She must have some hidden talents, if you know what I mean. I tried to ignore the whispers, focusing instead on my new husband's adoring gaze. As we settled into married life, I threw myself into being the perfect wife. I wanted to prove to everyone, including myself, that I deserved Ethan. But cracks started to appear in our fairy tale facade. It began with little things: a raised eyebrow at the state of the laundry, a sigh when dinner wasn't ready on time. "Emily, darling," Ethan said one evening, his tone deceptively light, "don't you think it's time you focused more on our home? Your career seems to be distracting you." I froze, spatula in hand. "What do you mean?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just saying, a wife's place is in the home. Don't you want to make me happy?" As I stood there, sauce bubbling on the stove, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in Ethan's voice made me wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. Little did I know, that moment was just the beginning of my descent into hell. Meeting Ethan's family was like stepping into another world. A world of polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and judgmental stares. I'll never forget that first dinner at their mansion. "Emily, dear, do come in," Sylvia, Ethan's mother, greeted me with air kisses. Her perfume was overpowering, her smile razor-sharp. "I hope you didn't have trouble finding us." I clutched my handbag, suddenly aware of its worn edges. "No, not at all. Your home is beautiful." Ian, Ethan's father, merely grunted from behind his newspaper. Ethan's sister, Kathy, bounded down the stairs, all smiles and designer clothes. "Emily, I'm so glad to finally meet you," she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "Ethan's told us so much about you." Dinner was a minefield of potential faux pas. I watched Sylvia's eyes narrow as I reached for the wrong fork, heard her tsk when I accidentally clinked my water glass. "So, Emily," Sylvia began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "Ethan tells us you work in advertising, was it?" "Marketing, actually," I corrected gently. "I'm an executive at—" "Oh, how quaint," she interrupted. I always admire women who choose to work, though I'm sure you'll want to focus on family soon enough. I felt my cheeks burn. Well, Mother, Ethan cut in smoothly. Emily's quite successful in her field. I'm very proud of her accomplishments. Sylvia's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. As weeks passed, the pressure to fit into Ethan's world grew. Sylvia's helpful suggestions became a constant barrage. Emily, darling, you simply must let me introduce you to my stylist, she'd say, eyeing my off-the-rack dress. Or, I've enrolled you in my favorite cooking class. Every wife should know how to prepare a proper soufflé. I tried to take it in stride, but each comment chipped away at my confidence. Kathy, surprisingly, became my ally. Don't let Mom get to you, she whispered one day as we helped clear the table. She's just set in her ways. I smiled gratefully. Thanks, Kathy. I'm trying, but sometimes I feel like I'll never measure up. She squeezed my arm. Just be yourself. That's who Ethan fell in love with, right? But even as Kathy reassured me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was constantly being evaluated, found wanting. Things came to a head at Sylvia's annual charity gala. I'd spent weeks preparing, determined to make a good impression, but as I descended the grand staircase, I heard the whispers. Is that Ethan's wife? In that dress? She looks so common. I froze, my confidence evaporating. Ethan appeared at my side, his smile tight. Everything all right, dear? He murmured. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we made our rounds, I felt Sylvia's disapproving gaze following me. Later, as I fumbled through small talk with Ethan's business associates, I overheard Sylvia speaking to a friend. Yes, Emily's nice enough, but between you and me, I had hoped Ethan would choose someone more suitable for our circle. My heart sank. I excused myself and fled to the powder room, fighting back tears. As I stared at my reflection, I wondered if I'd ever belong in this world. A soft knock startled me. Emily? It was Kathy. Are you okay? I opened the door, my carefully applied makeup smeared. Kathy's eyes widened. Oh, honey, she sighed, pulling me into a hug. Don't let them get to you. They're all snobs anyway. I pulled back, wiping my eyes. How do you stand it? Kathy's smile turned bitter. Years of practice. But listen, Emily, you don't have to change who you are for them. For anyone. As we rejoined the party, Ethan caught my eye from across the room. His brow furrowed in concern, but he made no move to come to me. In that moment, surrounded by glittering wealth and barely concealed disdain, I realized I was utterly alone in this new life I'd chosen. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. The alarm blared at 5 a.m., jolting me awake. Another day of juggling work and home life stretched before me. I tiptoed out of bed, careful not to wake Ethan, and headed to the kitchen. By 6:30, I'd prepared Ethan's favorite breakfast, ironed his shirts, and was reviewing notes for my big presentation. As I sipped my coffee, Ethan sauntered in, frowning at the table. No fresh squeezed orange juice? He asked, his tone sharp. I froze. I'm sorry, I forgot. I'll run to the store. Never mind, he cut me off. I'll grab something at the office. As he left, I felt a familiar knot in my stomach. When had I become so afraid of disappointing him? At work, I threw myself into my presentation, pushing aside my morning's troubles. Just as I was wrapping up, my phone buzzed. Ethan. Emily, we need to talk. Come home early. My heart raced as I drove home, imagining worst-case scenarios. Had I forgotten an important event? Was Ethan sick? I found him in the living room, pacing. Sit down, he said, his voice unnervingly calm. What's wrong? I asked, perching on the edge of the sofa. Ethan took a deep breath. I think it's time you quit your job. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? But why? Our home life is suffering, Emily. The house is a mess. Meals are rushed. And frankly, I'm tired of eating takeout when my wife should be cooking. I stared at him, stunned. But my career... I've worked so hard. Don't you think our marriage is more important? Ethan's eyes narrowed. Or are you saying you care more about your job than me? No, of course not, I stammered. But can't we find a balance? Maybe hire some help? Ethan scoffed. And admit we can't manage our own home? What would people think? As we argued, I felt my dreams slipping away. Finally, exhausted, I agreed to think about it. The next few weeks were a blur of increased household responsibilities and mounting pressure at work. I'd wake at 4 a.m. to clean, cook elaborate meals, and still try to meet my deadlines. One evening, as I rushed to prepare dinner after a long day, disaster struck. The roast burned, filling the kitchen with smoke. Ethan stormed in, waving his arms. "What's going on? Can't you do anything right?" Tears stung my eyes as I tried to salvage the meal. "I'm sorry, I got caught up with work and... Work again?" Ethan's voice dripped with disdain. "If you can't handle both, maybe it's time to make a choice." I turned to face him, anger finally bubbling up. "You knew who I was when you married me, Ethan. My career is part of who I am." His expression hardened. "Well, maybe I thought you'd grow up and realize what's truly important." As we glared at each other, the doorbell rang. Ethan's parents. "What's that smell?" Sylvia asked as she swept in, wrinkling her nose. I wanted to sink into the floor. There was an accident with dinner." Sylvia clicked her tongue. "Oh, Emily, how do you expect to be a proper wife if you can't even manage a simple meal?" I looked to Ethan, hoping he'd defend me. But he just shook his head, disappointment clear in his eyes. That night, lying awake, I replayed every criticism, every disapproving look. When had I become this shadow of myself, constantly seeking approval? My phone lit up with a text from my boss. "Great job on the Henderson account. You're on track for that promotion." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between two worlds, never good enough for either. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I wouldn't quit my job, but I knew this choice would come at a cost. The question was I ready to pay it? I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my once vibrant smile had faded to a weary line. This was the cost of trying to be everything to everyone. "Emily," Ethan's voice boomed from downstairs, "where's my blue tie? I have an important meeting." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and plastered on a smile. "Coming, dear." As I helped Ethan with his tie, he frowned at me. "You look tired. Are you still working on that project? I thought we agreed you'd cut back your hours." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just didn't sleep well." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Make sure you're home early today. My parents are coming for dinner." My stomach dropped. "But I have a presentation." "Figure it out," he snapped. "Family comes first, remember?" After he left, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. How could I possibly manage everything? As I scrolled through my phone, a text from my boss popped up. "Emily, don't forget, big presentation today. This could lead to that promotion we discussed." Tears pricked my eyes. I'd worked so hard for this opportunity, but Ethan's demands echoed in my head. With shaking hands, I dialed my boss's number. "Janet, I'm so sorry, but I can't make the presentation today. Family emergency." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Janet spoke, her disappointment palpable. "I see. Well, I'll have Tom cover for you. We'll talk tomorrow." I spent the day in a frenzy, cleaning the house and preparing an elaborate meal. By the time Ethan's parents arrived, I was exhausted but determined to make everything perfect. Sylvia swept in, her critical gaze taking in every detail. "Oh, Emily," she sighed, running a finger along the mantel. "Dusting is really an everyday task, dear." I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. "You're right, Sylvia. I'll try to do better." Dinner was a minefield of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled criticisms. As I served dessert, my phone buzzed insistently. Excusing myself, I checked the message. "Emily, we need to talk first thing tomorrow. Janet." My heart sank. I knew what that meant. "Everything all right?" Ethan asked as I returned, his tone more accusatory than concerned. "Fine," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. After his parents left, Ethan cornered me in the kitchen. "What was that about?" "You were distracted all evening." I took a deep breath. "It was work. I missed an important presentation today." Ethan's face darkened. "Because of dinner? Emily, we talked about this. Your priorities." "I know," I snapped, surprising us both. "I know what you think my priorities should be. But do you ever consider what I want?" "What you want," Ethan scoffed. "What about what this family needs? What I need from my wife?" As we argued, years of pent-up frustration poured out. Every criticism, every impossible expectation, every dream I'd sacrificed, it all came rushing to the surface. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm losing myself trying to be the person you want me to be." Ethan's expression hardened. "So what are you saying? That our marriage, our life together, isn't enough for you?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not the charming man I'd fallen in love with, but a stranger who seemed to take pleasure in my struggle. "I'm saying I need to make a change," I replied, my voice stronger now. For my own sanity. Ethan laughed coldly. Good luck with that. You'd be nothing without me, Emily. Remember that. As he stormed out, leaving me alone in the kitchen, I felt something shift inside me. Fear, yes, but also a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Tomorrow, I decided, things would be different. I just had to find the courage to make it happen. The day after my argument with Ethan, I found myself at Sylvia's door, a basket of muffins in hand. It was her birthday, and despite everything, I was determined to make an effort. As I rang the doorbell, I steeled myself for the inevitable criticism. Sylvia opened the door, her perfectly coiffed hair and immaculate outfit making me feel frumpy in comparison. Emily, dear, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. How thoughtful of you to drop by. I followed her into the pristine living room, where she immediately began fussing with the curtains. I hope these muffins aren't store-bought, she said, eyeing the basket suspiciously. No, I baked them myself this morning, I replied, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. Sylvia raised an eyebrow. Well, I suppose that's something. Though really, Emily, a woman in your position should be able to manage something a bit more sophisticated. I bit my tongue, reminding myself why I was here. Sylvia, I was hoping we could talk. About Ethan, about our family. Oh, yes, Sylvia interrupted, her tone sharpening. Ethan called me last night. He was quite upset about your little outburst. My heart sank. Of course he had called his mother. It wasn't an outburst, I said quietly. I was just trying to express how I feel. Sylvia's laugh was like ice. Feelings? My dear, marriage isn't about feelings. It's about duty, about maintaining appearances, something you seem to struggle with. As she continued to lecture me on the proper role of a wife, I felt a familiar sense of inadequacy creeping in. But then I remembered Ethan's cold words from the night before, and something inside me snapped. Enough, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I didn't come here for a lecture, Sylvia. I came to try and understand, to find some common ground, but I see now that's impossible. Sylvia's eyes widened in shock. Well, No, you never have, I continued, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. You've never tried to understand me, to see me as anything more than an accessory for your son. But I'm a person, Sylvia, with dreams, with ambitions, and I'm done apologizing for that. As I spoke, I saw something flicker in Sylvia's eyes. Was it recognition, respect? But it was quickly replaced by her usual cold disdain. If that's how you feel, she said icily, perhaps it's time you reconsidered your place in this family. Her words hit me like a physical blow. My place? I repeated, stunned. Yes, your place, Sylvia continued, her voice dripping with condescension. Ethan comes from a long line of successful, respected individuals. We have standards to maintain. If you can't meet those standards, well... She let the implication hang in the air. As I stared at her, I suddenly saw Ethan's behavior in a new light. The constant criticism, the impossible expectations, it all stemmed from here, from this woman who valued appearance over everything else. You're right, I said, standing up. I should reconsider my place, but not in the way you think. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. Thank you, Sylvia, I said, meeting her surprised gaze. You've made things very clear. As I drove home, my mind raced. I thought about Ethan, about the life we'd built, about the woman I used to be, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself trying to fit into their world. Pulling into our driveway, I made a decision. It was time to reclaim my life, my identity. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Ethan wouldn't let me go without a fight, and I had no illusions about the battles ahead. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the house, ready to face whatever came next. Because for the first time in years, I felt like myself again, and that was worth fighting for. The day Jess was born was the happiest of my life. As I held her tiny form in my arms, I felt a surge of love and protectiveness I'd never experienced before. Looking into her innocent eyes, I made a silent promise. I would shield her from the toxicity that had become my daily life. She's perfect, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Ethan stood beside the hospital bed, his expression unreadable. Let's hope she grows up to be a proper lady, he said, his tone oddly detached. I pushed aside the chill his words sent through me, focusing instead on Jess's tiny fingers wrapped around mine. She was my lifeline, my reason to keep going. As the months passed, I threw myself into motherhood with a passion that surprised even me. Every milestone, her first smile, her first steps, her first word, filled me with joy. For a while, it seemed like Jess's presence had softened Ethan. He doted on her, proudly showing off pictures to his colleagues. But as Jess grew older, I noticed a shift in Ethan's behavior. His critical nature, which had been somewhat subdued, began to resurface. The day Jess started kindergarten, I helped her get ready, my heart swelling with pride as she twirled in her new dress. "Mommy, look! I made this for Daddy!" Jess exclaimed, holding up a colorful drawing. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, smiling. "He'll love it." But when Ethan came home that evening, his reaction was far from what I'd hoped. "What's this mess?" he frowned, barely glancing at the artwork Jess thrust towards him. "I made it for you, Daddy," Jess said, her voice small. Ethan sighed. "Jess, if you're going to draw, at least try to stay inside the lines. This looks sloppy." I watched as Jess's face crumpled, my own heart breaking. "Ethan," I hissed, "she worked hard on that. She's only 5. He shot me a warning look. "We can't coddle her, Emily. She needs to learn to do things properly." That night, as I tucked Jess into bed, she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy like my drawing?" I swallowed hard, fighting back my own tears. "Oh, sweetie, Daddy does like it. He just has a funny way of showing it sometimes." But as the weeks went by, Ethan's criticism of Jess became more frequent and harsh. Her artwork was never good enough, her grades could always be better, even her laugh was too loud. One afternoon, I picked Jess up from school to find her unusually quiet. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She hesitated before speaking. "Mrs. Thompson asked us to draw our families today." "That sounds nice," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Did you have fun?" Jess shook her head, her lower lip trembling. I didn't want to draw Daddy. Is that bad?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. I pulled the car over, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Turning to face Jess, I saw the fear and confusion in her eyes, the same look I'd seen in my own reflection countless times. In that moment, everything crystallized. I thought about the years of emotional manipulation I'd endured, the constant criticism, the slow erosion of my self-worth. And now, watching it happen to my daughter, something inside me snapped. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "It's not bad at all. In fact, I think it's time we made some changes." As we drove home, my mind raced. I knew what I had to do, but the thought terrified me. Leaving Ethan wouldn't be easy. He wouldn't let us go without a fight, and his family's influence was far-reaching. But looking at Jess in the mirror, seeing the spark that was slowly being extinguished, I knew I had no choice. For her sake, and for my own, I had to find the courage to break free. That night, as Ethan launched into another tirade about Jess's shortcomings, I felt something shift inside me. Enough was enough. Tomorrow, I decided, we would leave. I just prayed I'd have the strength to see it through. The morning I decided to leave Ethan dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I'd spent the night packing essentials for Jess and me, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. As I made breakfast, trying to maintain an air of normalcy, Ethan entered the kitchen, his face thunderous. "Care to explain this?" he snarled, throwing a crumpled paper onto the counter. It was Jess's latest report card, all A's except for 1 B+. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "It's an excellent report card, Ethan. Jess should be proud." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Proud? Of mediocrity? That B+ is unacceptable." Something inside me snapped. "No, Ethan. What's unacceptable is how you treat our daughter, how you treat me." He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. "How dare you?" "No," I interrupted, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I'm done being silent. You've criticized and belittled us for years. I won't let you destroy Jess's self-esteem the way you destroyed mine." Ethan's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful. Mommy?" Jess's small voice cut through the tension. She stood in the doorway, a hurried, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, eyes wide with fear. In that moment, seeing the terror on my daughter's face, I knew there was no turning back. "Get your backpack, sweetie," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "We're going on a little trip." Ethan lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "You're not going anywhere with my daughter." I wrenched free, adrenaline coursing through me. "Watch me." The next few minutes were a blur of action. I grabbed our packed bags, hustled Jess into the car, and peeled out of the driveway, Ethan's shouts fading behind us. As we drove to my parents' house, Jess's quiet voice broke the silence. "Are we leaving Daddy forever?" My heart clenched. "I don't know, sweetie, but I promise, everything will be okay." My parents welcomed us with open arms, their faces a mix of concern and relief. "We've been waiting for this day," my father said, hugging me tightly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and heated phone calls. Ethan, predictably, fought me every step of the way. He froze our joint accounts, threatened to ruin my career, even tried to turn my own parents against me with wild accusations. But I stood firm, drawing strength from Jess's slowly returning smile and the support of my family. Then came the day I'd been dreading. I arrived home from a meeting with my lawyer to find Ethan's car in my parents' driveway. Inside, I found him sitting with Jess, his charm turned up to full wattage. "There's my girls," he said smoothly, as if the past weeks hadn't happened. "I've been thinking, and I realize I may have been a bit harsh. Why don't we go home and work this out?" For a moment, I faltered. The old Emily, desperate for approval, almost gave in, but then I saw Jess, her body tense, eyes darting between us nervously. "No, Ethan," I said firmly. "We're not coming back. In fact," I took a deep breath, "I want a divorce." The charm vanished from his face, replaced by cold fury. "You'll regret this, Emily. I'll make sure you never see Jess again. You're nothing without me, remember that." As he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I'd done it. I'd stood up to him. But I knew this was just the beginning of a long, brutal fight. That night, as I tucked Jess into bed, she looked up at me with those innocent eyes. "Mommy, are you scared?" I hesitated, then nodded. "A little, sweetie. But being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." As I kissed her goodnight, I silently vowed to be the mother she deserved. No matter what battles lay ahead, the road would be tough, but for the first time in years, I felt hope blooming in my chest. We were free, and I was determined to keep it that way. The day Ethan and Sylvia showed up at my workplace, I knew something was terribly wrong. Their smug expressions sent chills down my spine. "Emily, dear," Sylvia purred, loud enough for my coworkers to hear, "we need to discuss your indiscretions." Before I could respond, Ethan thrust a photo into my hands. My heart stopped. It showed me apparently in an intimate embrace with a man I didn't recognize. The image was grainy, but unmistakably meant to be me. "How could you?" Ethan hissed, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Think of poor Jess." I stood there, stunned, as whispers erupted around me. My boss approached, concern etched on her face. "Emily, perhaps you should take the rest of the day off." Humiliated and confused, I fled the office. By the time I reached my parents' house, my phone was buzzing with messages from concerned friends and judgmental acquaintances. The photo had spread like wildfire. "This can't be happening," I sobbed to my father, showing him the picture. His eyes narrowed. "Something's not right here. Let me make a call." Days passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I couldn't leave the house without facing accusing stares. Jess came home from school in tears, having overheard cruel gossip about her mother. Then a breakthrough. My father's friend, a retired investigator, uncovered the truth. The photo was expertly manipulated, a composite of my face on someone else's body, and the source none other than Kathy, Ethan's sister. Armed with this information, I confronted Ethan and his family. The showdown took place in my parents' living room, tension thick in the air. "Did you really think you'd get away with this?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. Ethan scoffed. "Prove it." That's when my father's friend stepped forward, presenting irrefutable evidence of the photo manipulation and Kathy's involvement. The color drained from their faces. "How dare you?" I seethed, years of pent-up anger finally breaking free. "You've manipulated and abused me for years, and now this, all because I finally stood up for myself and Jess?" Sylvia attempted damage control. "Now, Emily, let's not be hasty." "No," I cut her off. "I'm done listening to you, all of you. You're toxic, manipulative people, and I won't let you hurt me or my daughter ever again." I turned to Ethan, meeting his gaze head-on. "I want full custody of Jess. You'll pay child support, but you'll stay away from us. If you fight this, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done." For the first time, I saw fear in Ethan's eyes. He knew he was beaten. In the weeks that followed, the truth came out. Ethan's reputation was in tatters. Sylvia became a social pariah, and Kathy faced legal consequences for her role in the deception. As for me, I held my head high, supported by those who stood by me and strengthened by the ordeal. Months later, as Jess and I settled into our new apartment, I reflected on how far we'd come. My career was back on track, with a promotion on the horizon. Jess was thriving in her new school, her artwork proudly displayed on our fridge without fear of criticism. "Mommy," Jess said one evening as I tucked her in, "are you happy now?" I smiled, truly smiled, for what felt like the first time in years. "Yes, sweetie, we both are." As I closed her door, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was stronger, wiser, and finally free. The road hadn't been easy, and I knew there would be challenges ahead. But I was ready to face them, on my own terms. I had reclaimed my life, my identity, and my future, and in doing so, I'd given Jess the greatest gift of all. A mother who was whole, happy, and fiercely protective of the life we'd built together. The Emily who had once been lost in Ethan's shadow was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced her demons, fought for her child, and emerged victorious. As I looked out the window at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Whatever came next, I knew we could handle it. Together, Jess and I were unstoppable. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I clutched the edge of our kitchen counter. Tom stood across from me, his brow furrowed with concern. The weight of my secret pressed down on my chest, threatening to suffocate me. "Laura, honey, what's wrong?" Tom's voice was gentle, but I could hear the worry creeping in. "You've been acting strange all week." I looked up at him, my husband of 25 years. His salt and pepper hair and kind eyes were as familiar to me as my own reflection. We'd built a beautiful life together, full of love and laughter, but now I was about to shatter that perfect image. "Tom, I need to tell you something," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's about your mother." His eyebrows shot up. "My mother? What about her?" I swallowed hard. "I ran into her last week at the grocery store. She said some things, Tom. Terrible things." Tom's face darkened. "What kind of things?" "She told me I wasn't good enough for you," I said, the words tumbling out now. "That I've been holding you back all these years, that you would have been better off without me." Tom's jaw clenched. "She had no right to say that. None at all." "There's more," I continued, my voice shaking. "She threatened to tell you about something from my past. Something I've never told you." Tom reached across the counter and took my hands in his. "Laura, whatever it is, we can face it together. You know that, right?" I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I know, it's just, I'm scared, Tom. I'm scared of what she might do." Just then, the shrill ring of the telephone cut through the tension. We both jumped, startled by the sudden noise. Tom reached for the phone, his eyes never leaving mine. "Hello?" he answered. His face paled as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Mom, what are you?" "No, slow down. What do you mean you're coming over?" My heart raced as I watched Tom's expression change from confusion to anger. He glanced at me, mouthing, "I'm sorry," before turning his attention back to the call. "Mom, now's not a good time. We can't. Hello? Hello?" Tom stared at the receiver in disbelief. "She hung up. She's on her way over." Panic gripped me. "Tom, I can't face her. Not now. Not after what she said." He crossed the kitchen in 2 quick strides, pulling me into his arms. "It's okay, Laura. I won't let her hurt you. We'll get through this together." As we stood there, locked in an embrace, the doorbell rang. Tom and I looked at each other, fear mirrored in both our eyes. "She's here," I whispered. Tom squeezed my hand. "Remember, I'm on your side. Always." With heavy steps, we made our way to the front door. Tom's hand hesitated on the doorknob for a moment before he turned it, revealing the imposing figure of his mother, Irene. She swept into the house without waiting for an invitation, her eyes immediately locking onto me. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If it isn't my dear daughter-in-law, we have so much to discuss, don't we?" I felt my knees go weak, but Tom's steady presence beside me gave me strength. As Irene's cold gaze bore into me, I knew our perfect life was about to be turned upside down. The battle lines were drawn, and I had no choice but to fight. Irene's presence in our home felt like a dark cloud, suffocating and inescapable. As she settled into our living room, her eyes darted around, judging every detail. "Laura, dear," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet, "I hope you don't mind me dropping by. I was in the neighborhood and thought we could have a little chat. Tom squeezed my hand reassuringly. Mom, we were actually in the middle of something important. Irene waved her hand dismissively. Oh, nonsense. What could be more important than family? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Actually, Irene, Tom and I were discussing some private matters. Her eyes narrowed. Private matters? Between a husband and wife? How quaint. I'm sure whatever it is, you can discuss it with me present. After all, we're all family here. Tom stepped forward. Mom, I think it's best if you. I'm making dinner, I blurted out, desperate to diffuse the tension. Why don't you stay and eat with us, Irene? Tom shot me a concerned look, but I nodded slightly. Better to keep her close where we could watch her, I thought. Irene's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How lovely. I do hope you've improved your cooking skills since the last time, Laura. As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear Irene's voice drifting in from the living room, peppered with criticisms about our decor, our lifestyle, and of course me. Tom's responses were terse, clearly trying to defend me without outright confronting his mother. When dinner was finally ready, we gathered around the table. I'd prepared a roast chicken, Tom's favorite, with all the trimmings. As I set the platter down, I silently prayed for a peaceful meal. Irene took a small bite, her face contorting into a grimace. Oh my, Laura, is this chicken supposed to be this dry? I felt my cheeks flush. I'm sorry if it's not to your liking, Irene. Not to my liking, she interrupted. My dear, it's barely edible. I don't know how Tom puts up with such subpar cooking. In my day, a wife knew how to properly care for her husband. Tom slammed his fork down. That's enough, Mom. Laura's cooking is delicious, and I won't have you insulting her in our home. Irene's eyes widened in mock innocence. Insulting? I'm merely offering constructive criticism. Laura wants to improve, don't you, dear? I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I think I need some air, I mumbled, pushing away from the table. As I stepped onto our back porch, I heard Tom's raised voice inside, followed by the shrill tones of Irene's protests. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to steady my breathing. A few minutes later, the back door opened and Tom joined me. I'm so sorry, Laura. I asked her to leave. I turned to him, my voice barely above a whisper. She hates me, Tom. She always has, and she always will. He pulled me into a tight embrace. No, honey. She's just set in her ways. But I won't let her treat you like this anymore. I promise. Just then, Irene's voice cut through the night air. Thomas, I refuse to leave until we discuss this matter properly. Tom sighed, his body tensing. I should go deal with her. As he turned to leave, I grabbed his arm. Tom, wait, there's something else I need to tell you, something about my past that Irene threatened to reveal. His eyes searched mine, concern etched across his face. What is it, Laura? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. Before we met, I was... Thomas! Irene's voice interrupted again, closer this time. I'm waiting. Tom squeezed my hand. Hold that thought. Let me get rid of her, and then we'll talk. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. As he disappeared back into the house, I leaned against the porch railing, my mind racing. How could I tell Tom the truth about my past? And more importantly, how could we ever find peace with Irene in our lives? The sound of raised voices drifted from inside, and I knew one thing for certain. This battle with Irene was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The annual Thompson family reunion was in full swing, the backyard of Tom's childhood home bustling with relatives from near and far. I stood by the buffet table, nervously adjusting my dress and trying to blend in. Despite being married to Tom for years, I still felt like an outsider at these gatherings. Laura, darling, Irene's voice cut through the chatter. She glided towards me, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. I'm so glad you could make it. I was worried you might be too busy, or perhaps too intimidated. I forced a smile. Of course not, Irene. I wouldn't miss it for the world. She linked her arm through mine, steering me away from the crowd. Come with me, dear. I have something special to show you. Alarm bells rang in my head, but I couldn't refuse without causing a scene. Tom caught my eye from across the yard, his brow furrowed in concern. I gave him a small nod, signaling I was okay. Irene led me into the house and up to her bedroom. I wanted to show you this, she said, reaching into her closet and pulling out an ornate wooden box. It's been in the Thompson family for generations. She opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond necklace. Beautiful, isn't it? Of course, it's meant to be worn by a true Thompson woman. The implications stung, but I kept my composure. It's lovely, Irene. Here, she said, suddenly thrusting the box into my hands. Hold this while I freshen up. Before I could protest, she disappeared into the ensuite bathroom. I stood there, awkwardly clutching the box, unsure what to do. After a few minutes, I set it down on her dresser and made my way back to the party. An hour later, chaos erupted. Irene's shrill voice pierced the air. It's gone! The necklace is gone! Guests gathered around as Irene dramatically recounted how she'd shown me the necklace and left me alone with it. All eyes turned to me, suspicion and judgment clear on their faces. I didn't take it, I said, my voice shaking. I left it on the dresser and came back down. Irene's eyes narrowed. Well, then you won't mind if we check your bag, will you? My heart raced as she snatched my purse from a nearby chair. With a triumphant cry, she pulled out the diamond necklace. Aha! I knew it. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tom pushed his way to my side, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. Laura, he whispered, tell me you didn't. Tears welled in my eyes. I swear, Tom, I didn't take it. I don't know how it got there. As Irene gloated and the family whispered, a sudden realization hit me. With trembling hands, I reached for Irene's designer handbag sitting innocently on a nearby table. What do you think you're doing? Irene snapped. I upended her bag, and out tumbled her wallet, keys, and the wooden box that had held the necklace. Silence fell over the gathering. Tom's cousin Sarah spoke up. But Irene, if the box is in your bag, how did the necklace end up in Laura's? Irene's face paled. I don't know. This is absurd. Tom's eyes met mine, understanding dawning. Mom, he said, his voice low and dangerous, did you plant that necklace in Laura's bag? Irene sputtered, her carefully constructed trap crumbling around her. Of course not. I would never. This is all a misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Family members began to mutter, casting suspicious glances at Irene instead of me. Tom wrapped a protective arm around my shoulders. I think it's time we left, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And Mom, we'll be discussing this later. As we walked away, leaving a flustered Irene in our wake, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time, the family had seen through Irene's manipulations. Tom squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry, Laura. I should have believed you immediately. I leaned into him, relief washing over me. It's okay. We're in this together, remember? As we drove home, I realized the battle was far from over. Irene wouldn't take this humiliation lightly. But for now, I had won a small victory, and with Tom by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The incessant ringing of the phone jolted me awake. I groaned, glancing at the clock, 3:17 a.m. There was only one person who would call at this ungodly hour. Irene, I muttered, reaching for the receiver. Laura! Thank goodness you're awake. Irene's voice crackled through the line, feigning concern. I had the most terrible dream about Tom. I simply had to call and make sure he was all right. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Tom's fine, Irene. He's sleeping, like most people at this hour. Well, wake him up. A mother needs to hear her son's voice. Irene, it's the middle of the night. I'm not waking Tom. Good night. I hung up, my hands shaking with frustration. This had become our new normal since the family reunion fiasco. Irene, unable to openly accuse me anymore, had resorted to more insidious tactics. Constant phone calls, day and night, unannounced visits, chance encounters at the grocery store, the bank, even outside my workplace. Tom stirred beside me. Was that my mother again? I nodded, sinking back into the pillows. I'm sorry, I tried not to wake you. He pulled me close, his voice heavy with sleep and worry. This can't go on, Laura. We need to do something. The next morning, as I was rushing to leave for work, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Irene standing there, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. Laura, darling, I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd pop by for a quick chat. I glanced at my watch, anxiety rising. Irene, I'm late for work. I really can't. She pushed past me into the house. Oh, nonsense. Your job can wait. Family is more important, isn't it? For the next hour, I sat trapped in my own living room, listening to Irene prattle on about her latest social engagements and not-so-subtle digs at my housekeeping. By the time I finally managed to usher her out, I was over an hour late for work. That evening, Tom and I sat at the kitchen table, both exhausted and on edge. She showed up at my office today, Tom said, his voice tight with anger. Walked right past security, saying she had an urgent family matter to discuss. It was beyond embarrassing. I reached for his hand. Tom, we can't live like this anymore. Your mother she's destroying our lives. He nodded, a pained expression on his face. I know, I've been thinking, maybe we should spend this weekend at your parents' place. Get away for a bit, clear our heads. Relief washed over me. That sounds perfect. We can leave Friday after work. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. A weekend away from Irene's constant presence might be just what we needed to regroup and figure out our next move. Friday afternoon arrived, and we were packing the car when my cell phone rang. It was my mother. Laura, honey, she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I just wanted to let you know. Irene called us. My blood ran cold. What? What did she say? She told us she was worried about you and Tom, said you've been acting strangely. She asked if she could come stay with us this weekend, too, to keep an eye on things. I nearly dropped the phone. Mom, please tell me you didn't agree. The silence on the other end was deafening. I'm sorry, sweetie. She was so insistent, and she is Tom's mother after all. We didn't know how to say no. As I hung up, I felt the walls closing in. Our one refuge, our safe haven, had been invaded. Tom found me slumped against the car, tears streaming down my face. Laura, what's wrong? What happened? I looked up at him, my voice barely a whisper. She's done it again, Tom. Your mother, she's going to be at my parents' house this weekend. Tom's face hardened, a resolve I'd never seen before settling over his features. That's it. This ends now. We're not running anymore, Laura. It's time we faced my mother head-on and put a stop to this once and for all. As we stood there, the weight of his words sinking in, I realized we were at a crossroads. Whatever we decided to do next would change everything. The question was, were we ready for the battle that lay ahead? The moment we arrived at my parents' house, I knew something was terribly wrong. Irene's car was parked in the driveway, and the tension in the air was palpable. Tom squeezed my hand reassuringly as we walked up to the front door. My mother greeted us with a strained smile. Laura, Tom, come in. We're all in the living room. As we entered, I saw Irene perched on the edge of the sofa, her eyes red-rimmed but gleaming with an unsettling intensity. My father sat in his armchair, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his own home. Oh, Thomas, Irene cried, leaping up to embrace Tom. Thank goodness you're here. We have dreadful news. Tom stiffened. What's going on, Mom? Irene's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. It's your father. Henry, he's gone. The room spun around me. Tom's father, Henry, had always been a kind, gentle presence in our lives, a buffer between us and Irene's machinations. And now... What happened? Tom asked, his voice barely audible. A heart attack, Irene said, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. So sudden, so tragic, and now I'm all alone in this cruel world. I watched as Tom struggled to process the news, his grief palpable. But even in this moment of shock, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Irene's behavior. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and family gatherings. Irene insisted on staying with us, claiming she couldn't bear to be alone in her house. Every night I'd lie awake, listening to her sobs echoing through the walls, feeling a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. It was during the reading of Henry's will that things took an unexpected turn. The family lawyer cleared his throat awkwardly. Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid there's been some complications with the estate. Irene's head snapped up. What do you mean, complications? It appears that a significant portion of Mr. Thompson's assets were, well, they were liquidated in the months leading up to his passing. The accounts are nearly empty. The room erupted into chaos. Irene wailed dramatically, while other family members whispered furiously among themselves. Tom sat in stunned silence, his face ashen. As we drove home that evening, Tom finally spoke. I can't believe Dad would do this. It doesn't make sense. I hesitated, then voiced the suspicion that had been growing in my mind. Tom, what if it wasn't your father who emptied those accounts? He looked at me sharply. What are you saying, Laura? I'm saying that your mother's grief seems performative. And have you noticed how she's been throwing money around since Henry died? The new car? The expensive clothes? Tom's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. You think my mother stole from my father before he died? I think it's a possibility we can't ignore, I said softly. When we got home, Irene was waiting for us, her face a mask of despair. "Oh, Thomas," she cried. "I don't know what I'm going to do. With your father gone and the estate in shambles, I'm destitute." I watched as Tom's face softened with sympathy, and my heart sank. Despite everything, he still couldn't see through his mother's manipulations. Irene continued, her voice trembling. "I hate to ask this of you, but you're all I have left. Could you and Laura, perhaps, help me out, just until I get back on my feet?" Tom looked at me, his eyes pleading. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. This was Irene's endgame, to worm her way into our lives permanently, to bleed us dry emotionally and financially. In that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. I could go along with Tom's desire to help his mother, potentially destroying our marriage in the process, or I could take a stand. The truth about my past that I'd been hiding, the secret that Irene had threatened to reveal, suddenly, it didn't seem so important anymore. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face Irene. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "we need to talk, all of us. And this time, I'm not holding anything back." The tension in the room was suffocating as I faced Irene, Tom standing uncertainly between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I'd been avoiding for years. "Irene," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "I know about the money. I know you've been spending recklessly, and now you're in debt." Irene's face contorted with rage. "How dare you? You know nothing about my finances." "I know more than you think," I countered. "I've seen the credit card bills, the loan notices. You've blown through Henry's entire estate in a matter of months." Tom's eyes widened in disbelief. "Mom, is this true?" Irene's demeanor suddenly shifted, tears welling up in her eyes. "Oh, Thomas," she wailed, "I didn't know what else to do. I was so lonely, so lost without your father. I just wanted to feel alive again." I watched as Tom's resolve wavered, his instinct to comfort his mother battling with the shock of her deception. I knew I had to act fast. "Tom," I said gently, "remember what we discussed in the car, about the timing of the accounts being emptied?" Realization dawned on his face. "Mom," he said slowly, "did you start spending Dad's money before he died?" Irene's sobs abruptly ceased, her eyes darting between us like a cornered animal. "That's preposterous. I would never—" "We can easily check the bank records," I interrupted. "The truth will come out, Irene." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Irene's face hardened, all pretense of grief vanishing. "Fine," she spat. "So what if I did? Henry was dying anyway. Why should all that money go to waste?" Tom stumbled back as if he'd been struck. "I can't believe this," he whispered. Irene turned to him, her voice suddenly honey-sweet. "Darling, you understand, don't you? Your poor mother facing a future all alone. I need your help, Thomas, just a small loan to tide me over." I watched in horror as Tom's expression softened. "Mom, No," I said firmly, stepping between them. "We're not giving you a cent, Irene. This ends now." Irene's eyes flashed dangerously. "Oh, Laura," she hissed, "you think you've won, don't you? But you forget, I know your secret, the one you've been too afraid to tell Thomas all these years." My heart raced, but I stood my ground. "Go ahead, tell him. I'm not afraid anymore." "Tom," Irene said, her voice dripping with venom, "did you know your precious wife was once arrested for embezzlement? She's nothing but a common thief." The room fell silent. I closed my eyes, waiting for the fallout, but then I felt Tom's hand slip into mine. "I know," he said quietly. My eyes flew open. "You know?" Tom nodded, squeezing my hand. "Laura told me everything last week. We have no secrets between us, Mom. Unlike you." Irene's face drained of color. But she's a criminal. How can you stand by her?" "Because she made a mistake, owned up to it, and became a better person," Tom replied. "She's not perfect, but she's honest, and that's more than I can say for you right now." Irene's composure crumbled entirely. "You ungrateful brats," she shrieked. "After everything I've done for you, I'll sue you both. I'll tell everyone about Laura's past." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "We're not afraid of the truth anymore." As Irene continued to rant and rave, Tom turned to me. "I think it's time we asked her to leave," he said softly. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. But as Tom moved to escort his mother out, Irene suddenly clutched her chest, gasping for air. "Mom?" Tom cried, rushing to her side. "My heart!" Irene wheezed, collapsing to the floor. As Tom called for an ambulance, I stood frozen, torn between suspicion of another manipulation and genuine concern. Was this Irene's final desperate play for sympathy, or had our confrontation pushed her too far? As sirens wailed in the distance, I realized that no matter what happened next, our lives would never be the same. The hospital waiting room was a blur of activity, but I felt frozen in place. Tham paced back and forth, his face etched with worry. I couldn't shake the feeling that even now, collapsed and hooked up to machines, Irene was manipulating us. Hours ticked by before a doctor finally approached. "Mrs. Thompson is stable," he said. "She suffered a mild heart attack, likely brought on by stress. She'll need to stay for observation, but she should make a full recovery." Tham sagged with relief, but I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As we entered Irene's room, her eyes fluttered open. "Thomas," she whispered weakly, reaching for his hand. "My darling boy." I hung back, watching as Tom's resolve crumbled in the face of his mother's frailty. She looked so small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, nothing like the scheming woman who had tormented us for years. "Mom," Tom said softly, "I'm glad you're okay, but we need to talk about what happened." Irene's eyes welled with tears. "Oh, Thomas, I've been so foolish. Can you ever forgive me? I promise I'll change. I'll get help for my spending. I'll be better." I saw Tom wavering, his kind heart battling against years of manipulation. I knew I had to act. "Irene," I said, stepping forward, "we're glad you're recovering, but this doesn't change anything. Your actions have consequences." Her eyes narrowed, the mask of frailty slipping for a moment. "Laura, dear, surely you of all people understand the need for second chances?" I felt Tom tense beside me, but I stood my ground. "I do. But I also understand the difference between genuine remorse and manipulation. This ends now, Irene. We're done." Tom nodded slowly. "She's right, Mom. We can't keep doing this. It's not healthy for any of us." Irene's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful children. After everything I've done for you, I'll tell everyone about Laura's past. I'll ruin you both." "No, you won't," Tom said firmly. "Because if you do, we'll tell everyone about your financial misdeeds. It's over, Mom. We're cutting ties." As we turned to leave, Irene's voice rose to a shriek. "You can't leave me. I'm your mother. I'm all alone." In the hallway, Tom leaned against the wall, his body shaking. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling his tears soak into my shoulder. "We did the right thing," I whispered. "It's going to be okay." That night, as we lay in bed, both too wired to sleep, Tom turned to me. "We can't stay here," he said. "As long as we're in this town, she'll find a way to get to us." I nodded, an idea forming. What if we left? Started fresh somewhere new? Tom's eyes lit up. "You mean it? You'd be willing to move?" "I'd go anywhere with you," I said, squeezing his hand. "We could find a quiet town far from here, build a new life, just the two of us." As we began to plan our escape, a sense of excitement replaced the dread that had weighed us down for so long. We stayed up all night, researching towns, looking at houses, dreaming of a future free from Irene's shadow. The next morning, exhausted but determined, we set our plan in motion. We called a realtor, put our house on the market, started packing our essentials. We told no one of our plans, not even my parents. The less people who knew, the less chance Irene had of finding out. Just as we were finalizing the details of our move, my phone rang. It was Irene's number. My hand shook as I answered. "Laura?" Irene's voice was sickeningly sweet. "I think it's time we had a little chat, don't you? Just the two of us. No Tom, no hospitals, no distractions. What do you say?" I looked at Tom, who was watching me with concern. In that moment, I knew we had one last battle to face before we could truly be free. "All right, Irene," I said, my voice steady. "Let's end this once and for all." The quaint little town of Millbrook welcomed us with open arms. As Tom and I unloaded the last of our boxes into our new home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We were finally free. "Can you believe it?" Tom said, wrapping his arms around me. "A fresh start, just like we planned." I leaned into his embrace, savoring the moment. It feels almost too good to be true. We spent the next few weeks settling in, exploring our new neighborhood, and making friends. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. No more looking over my shoulder, no more dreading the ring of the phone. But as autumn turned to winter, a familiar unease began to creep in. What if Irene found us? What if she showed up on our doorstep, ready to shatter our newfound tranquility? One crisp December morning, as I was preparing breakfast, A wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it to the bathroom before emptying the contents of my stomach. Tom found me there, pale and shaky. "Laura, are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I nodded weakly. I think I might be pregnant." Tom's eyes widened, a mix of joy and fear crossing his face. "Are you sure?" A quick trip to the pharmacy and an anxious wait later, we had our answer. 2 pink lines. We were going to be parents. As the initial shock wore off, excitement took over. We began planning for the nursery, discussing names, dreaming of our future as a family. But with each passing day, a nagging worry grew in the back of my mind. "Tom," I said one evening as we sat by the fireplace, "what if Irene finds out about the baby? What if she tries to worm her way back into our lives?" Tom's jaw clenched. "We won't let her. This is our family, our future. She has no place in it." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart nearly stopped as I read the message. "Congratulations on the little one. I always knew I'd be a grandmother someday. See you soon, Irene." I showed Tom the message, watching as anger and fear battled across his face. "How did she find out?" he whispered. "It doesn't matter," I said, surprising myself with my calm. "What matters is what we do now." We spent the night discussing our options, weighing the pros and cons of each. By morning, we had made our decision. I picked up my phone and dialed Irene's number. She answered on the first ring. Well, she purred. "I was wondering when you'd call." "Listen carefully, Irene," I said, my voice steady. "Yes, I'm pregnant. Yes, you're going to be a grandmother. But you will never, ever be a part of this child's life, not unless you make some serious changes." "How dare you?" she began, but I cut her off. "No, how dare you? You've manipulated and hurt us for years, Herv. If you want any chance at being in this child's life, you need to get help. Real help. Therapy, financial counseling, the works. And even then, it'll be on our terms." There was a long silence on the other end. When Irene finally spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. "And if I do all that, you'll let me see the baby?" "We'll consider it," I said firmly. "But understand this, one step out of line, one attempt at manipulation, and you're out. For good. This is your last chance. Irene, take it or leave it." Another pause. I understand. I'll do it, for the baby." As I hung up, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. For the first time, I had faced Irene on my own terms, without fear or hesitation. Tom pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. 6 months later, as I held our newborn daughter in my arms, I marveled at how much had changed. Irene had kept her word, attending therapy and making real progress. While our relationship was still fragile, there was hope for a better future. As I looked down at my daughter's tiny face, I made a silent promise. No matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as a family. The cycle of manipulation and fear ended with us. Our daughter would know only love, strength, and honesty. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of my little family, I knew that we had truly won. Not just against Irene, but against the fear and doubt that had held us back for so long. We were free, we were happy, and we were ready for whatever life had in store for us next. I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, taking a deep breath before knocking on Jacob's door. My fiancé and I had been living separately while we planned our wedding, but today was the day we'd finally start looking at houses together. As I raised my hand to knock, the door swung open. "Oh!" I stumbled back, startled to see not Jacob, but an older woman with piercing blue eyes and a severe expression. "I'm sorry, I must have the wrong—" "You must be Beth," the woman said, her voice clipped. "I'm Elaine, Jacob's mother." I blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. Jacob's mother passed away when he was young." Elaine's lips thinned into a tight smile. "His adoptive mother, yes, I'm his biological mother." My mind reeled. In the 2 years we'd been together, Jacob had never mentioned a biological mother. Before I could formulate a response, Jacob appeared behind Elaine, his face pale. "Beth, I can explain," he started, but Elaine cut him off. "There's nothing to explain, Jacob. I'm here now, and it's time we were a family again." I looked between them, my stomach churning. "Jacob, what's going on?" He stepped around Elaine, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry, Beth. I only found out recently myself. Elaine contacted me a few weeks ago, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." Elaine's eyes narrowed as she watched Jacob take my hand. "Well, now everyone knows. Shall we go inside? I've made lunch." I hesitated, but Jacob squeezed my hand reassuringly. "It's okay," he murmured. "We'll talk about this." As we entered the apartment, I couldn't help but notice how Elaine had made herself at home. Her coat was draped over the back of Jacob's favorite chair, and the air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar cooking. "Sit, sit," Elaine urged, ushering us to the table. "I've made Jacob's favorite, pot roast with carrots and potatoes." I frowned. "But Jacob's a vegetarian." Elaine waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense, my boy loves a good pot roast." Jacob cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, Elaine, I haven't eaten meat in years." A flicker of annoyance crossed Elaine's face before she covered it with a smile. "Well, more for us then. Beth, you'll have some, won't you?" "I'm not really hungry," I said, my appetite gone. "Jacob, can we talk for a moment, privately?" Before he could answer, Elaine interjected. "Now, Beth, there's no need for secrets. We're all family here." I bristled at her presumption. "With all due respect, Elaine, I've only just met you, and Jacob and I need to discuss this situation." Elaine's eyes flashed. "Situation? I'm his mother. I have every right to be here." Jacob stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Elaine, please, Beth's right. We need a moment." As Jacob led me to the bedroom, I could feel Elaine's eyes boring into my back. Once the door was closed, I turned to Jacob. "What the hell is going on?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him. "I'm so sorry, Beth. I should have told you sooner. Elaine contacted me out of the blue a few weeks ago. She claims she gave me up for adoption when I was a baby, but now she wants to reconnect. And you believe her?" Jacob shrugged helplessly. "I don't know what to believe. She has documents, photos. I was going to tell you, I swear. I just wanted to be sure before I brought it up." I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "Okay, so what now?" Before Jacob could answer, there was a sharp knock at the door. "Jacob? Is everything all right in there?" I groaned quietly. "She's not going to make this easy, is she?" Jacob squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out together, okay? I love you." As we opened the door to face Elaine, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had just become infinitely more complicated. Little did I know just how right I was. I never imagined my wedding planning would involve fending off an overzealous future mother-in-law, but here I was, staring at Elaine across the bridal boutique. She'd somehow wormed her way into our dress shopping appointment, and now she was eyeing the gowns with a critical gaze that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Beth, darling," Elaine cooed, holding up a frilly monstrosity. "This would look divine on you. So traditional, so proper." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Elaine, but I was thinking of something more modern." Her lips tightened. "Modern? But Jacob loves classic styles. Don't you want to please your husband?" Before I could retort, my best friend and maid of honor, Sarah, intervened. "I think Beth knows what Jacob likes better than anyone. Right, Beth?" I nodded gratefully, but Elaine wasn't finished. She sidled up to me, her voice low. "You know, dear, I've known Jacob his whole life. Even if we were separated for a while, I know what's best for him." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that she was Jacob's mother, allegedly. We still hadn't confirmed her story, but Jacob seemed convinced. I tried to focus on the dresses, but Elaine's constant commentary made it impossible. After an hour of thinly veiled insults and helpful suggestions, I was at my wit's end. "I think that's enough for today," I announced, my voice strained. "Thanks for coming, Elaine, but Sarah and I can handle the rest." Elaine's eyes flashed. "But we've only just started, and I haven't even shown you the guest list changes I've made." I froze. "Guest list changes?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, just a few additions. Some old friends of mine who'd love to see Jacob, and I took the liberty of removing a few of your college friends. We need to keep things classy, after all." That was the last straw. "Elaine," I said, my voice tight, "this is our wedding. Jacob's and mine, not yours. You don't get to make changes to our guest list or anything else." Her face darkened. "I'm his mother. I have every right." "You've known him for 3 weeks," I exploded. "I've been with Jacob for 2 years. I know him, I love him, and I'm the one marrying him, not you." The boutique fell silent. Elaine's face contorted with rage, but before she could speak, my phone rang. It was Jacob. I answered, grateful for the interruption. "Beth?" Jacob's voice was strained. "Where are you? Is my mother with you?" "We're at the bridal shop. Why? What's wrong?" He sighed heavily. "I just got home. The apartment's a mess. Looks like someone's been going through our things. And there's a note. From Elaine. My blood ran cold. I looked at Elaine, who was watching me with an unsettling smile. What does it say? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. It says she's fixing things, making our home more suitable. Beth, I think she broke in while we were out. I closed my eyes, willing myself to stay calm. Jacob, I need you to listen to me. Your mother is here right now. She's been interfering with the wedding plans, changing our guest list without permission. And now this? We need to talk about boundaries. There was a long pause. You're right, he said finally. I'll meet you at the shop. We'll deal with this together. As I hung up, Elaine approached, her face a mask of concern. Is everything all right, dear? Jacob's not having second thoughts, is he? The implication made my blood boil. No, Elaine, he's not. But we do need to have a serious conversation about boundaries. Her eyes narrowed. Boundaries? But we're family now. There are no boundaries in family. As Jacob's car pulled up outside the boutique, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. One way or another, this ended today. Our wedding, our lives, depended on it. I smoothed my dress and took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Today was supposed to be a joyous occasion, my bridal shower. My best friends had planned everything, and I was determined to enjoy it, despite the cloud of tension that had been hanging over us since Elaine's arrival in our lives. As I entered the restaurant's private room, I was greeted by cheers and hugs from my closest friends and family. The room was beautifully decorated with soft pink and white flowers, and a table laden with gifts caught my eye. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax and bask in the love surrounding me. That moment was short-lived. My phone buzzed insistently in my purse. I ignored it at first, but when it rang for the third time in 5 minutes, I excused myself to check it. My heart sank when I saw Jacob's name on the screen. Beth? His voice was strained. I'm so sorry to bother you during your shower, but there's been an accident. Elaine's in the hospital. My blood ran cold. What happened? Is she okay? She says she fell down the stairs at her apartment. She's asking for me and for you. I closed my eyes, torn between concern and suspicion. Jacob, I know, he interrupted. But she's alone, Beth. She doesn't have anyone else. Could you come, please? I glanced back at the room full of my friends and family, all gathered to celebrate our upcoming wedding. With a heavy heart, I agreed. When I returned to explain the situation, Sarah pulled me aside. Beth, don't you think this is a little convenient? She whispered. Your bridal shower just happens to be interrupted by Elaine's emergency? I nodded, the same thought having crossed my mind. I know, but what can I do if she's really hurt? Sarah squeezed my hand. Just be careful, okay? That woman gives me the creeps. An hour later, I found myself in the hospital waiting room with Jacob. A nurse approached us, looking confused. Mr. Reeves, your mother's asking for you, but, well, there seems to be some confusion. She's not actually injured. Jacob and I exchanged glances. What do you mean? He asked. The nurse lowered her voice. She came in claiming she had fallen, but there are no signs of injury, not even a bruise. When we tried to discharge her, she became agitated. My suspicions confirmed. I felt a surge of anger. Jacob, she faked this. She did this to ruin my bridal shower. Before Jacob could respond, we heard Elaine's voice echoing down the hallway. Jacob, my boy, where are you? I need you. We followed the sound to find Elaine sitting up in a hospital bed, looking perfectly healthy. When she saw us, her face lit up, but then fell when she noticed me. Oh, Beth, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You didn't have to come. I know how important your little party was. I bit back a retort, but Jacob spoke up. Mom, what's going on? The nurses say you're not hurt. Elaine's eyes widened innocently. Not hurt? But I fell. I could have died, Jacob, and all Beth cares about is her party. That was the last straw. Enough, I shouted, surprising even myself. Elaine, this has to stop. You didn't fall. You made this all up to sabotage my bridal shower and manipulate Jacob. I'm done playing nice. Elaine's face contorted with rage. How dare you? Jacob, are you going to let her speak to your mother like this? We both turned to Jacob, who looked torn. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. No, Jacob. It's time to choose. Either you set clear boundaries with your mother right now, or... I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Or I'm calling off the wedding. The room fell silent. Jacob's eyes widened in shock, Elaine's narrowed in triumph, and I stood my ground, heart pounding. Everything hinged on Jacob's next words. I stared at my phone, willing it to ring. Jacob had been gone for 3 days on a business trip, and I was counting the hours until his return. After the hospital incident, he'd finally set some boundaries with Elaine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our troubles were far from over. A sharp knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. My heart sank. Elaine stood on our doorstep, a sickeningly sweet smile plastered on her face. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Elaine, what are you doing here?" She brushed past me, entering without invitation. "Oh, Beth, dear, I thought you might be lonely with Jacob away. I've come to keep you company and help around the house." Before I could protest, she was in our kitchen, skiing at the dishes in the sink. My, Jacob can't come home to this mess. Let's get started, shall we?" For the next few hours, I found myself trapped in a bizarre domestic nightmare. Elaine critiqued every aspect of our home, from the way I folded laundry to the contents of our refrigerator. Kale chips? Quinoa? She wrinkled her nose at our health food. "No wonder you're so thin, dear. Jacob needs a woman with some meat on her bones." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that engaging would only make things worse. But as the day wore on, my patience wore thin. "Elaine," I said finally, as she rearranged our bookshelf for the 3rd time. "I appreciate your help, but I can manage on my own." She turned, eyes flashing. "Can you? Because from what I've seen, you're hardly fit to be a wife, let alone a mother." The words hit me like a slap. "Excuse me? Oh, don't act surprised." Elaine's voice dripped with disdain. "Your career woman lifestyle, your modern ideas about marriage, it's all wrong for Jacob. He needs a traditional family, with a wife who knows her place." I felt my anger rising, but before I could respond, Elaine's eyes landed on a framed photo of Jacob and me. In one swift motion, she knocked it off the shelf, sending it crashing to the floor. "Oops," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "How clumsy of me." As I knelt to pick up the shattered glass, a realization hit me. This wasn't about helping or even about criticizing me. Elaine was trying to erase me from Jacob's life, piece by piece. I stood, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Elaine, I think it's time for you to leave." She laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Leave? Oh, no, dear. I'm not going anywhere. This is my son's home, and I have every right to be here." "No, you don't." I moved towards the door, opening it wide. "Jacob and I are engaged. This is our home, not yours. Now, please leave before I call the police." Elaine's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" She lunged forward, her nails raking across my cheek. I stumbled back, shocked by the sudden violence. In that moment, something in me snapped. I grabbed Elaine's arm, my grip firm but not bruising. "Get out, now." For a moment we stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then slowly Elaine straightened up. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Jacob will see you for what you really are." As the door slammed behind her, I sank to the floor, my hand touching the scratch on my cheek. Tears welled up, a mix of anger, fear, and frustration. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, dialing Jacob's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Jacob," I said, my voice breaking. "We need to talk. As soon as you get home. I can't do this anymore. Something has to change." As I ended the call, I looked around our apartment, now bearing the scars of Elaine's visit. I knew I was at a crossroads. Either Jacob would finally see the truth about his mother, or I'd have to make the hardest decision of my life. Either way, when Jacob returned, nothing would ever be the same. I paced our living room, my nerves frayed to breaking point. Jacob's key turned in the lock, and I froze, my heart pounding. He entered, his tired smile fading as he took in my disheveled appearance and the lingering chaos from Elaine's visit. "Beth? What happened?" I burst into tears, the stress of the past few days finally overwhelming me. Jacob rushed to my side, enveloping me in his arms. Through sobs, I recounted Elaine's intrusion, her cruel words, and the physical altercation. Jacob's face darkened with each word. "I can't believe she'd go this far," he muttered, gently touching the fading scratch on my cheek. "Jacob, we can't go on like this," I said, pulling away to look him in the eye. "Your mother is tearing us apart. She's manipulative, she's cruel, and I'm afraid of what she might do next." He nodded slowly, a pained expression on his face. "You're right. I've been in denial, hoping she'd change, but this is unforgivable." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A sharp knock at the door made us both jump. Jacob moved to answer it, but I grabbed his arm, shaking my head frantically. "Jacob, Beth, I know you're in there." Elaine's voice, shrill and angry, carried through the door. "Open up this instant." Jacob's jaw clenched. He strode to the door, throwing it open. "That's enough, Mom. You need to leave, now." Elaine's eyes widened in faux innocence. "Leave? But darling, I've brought dinner. I thought we could all talk, clear the air after that unfortunate misunderstanding with Beth." I stepped forward, finding strength in Jacob's presence. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Elaine. You attacked me." "Attacked?" Elaine laughed, the sound grating. "Oh, please, you're so sensitive, dear. A little constructive criticism, and you fall to pieces. Jacob, surely you see how unstable she is?" Jacob's voice was cold. "The only unstable person here is you, Mom. I've seen the truth now, and I won't let you hurt Beth or come between us anymore." Elaine's facade crumbled, her face contorting with rage. "You ungrateful child. After everything I've done for you, I gave you life. I found you again. And this is how you repay me?" "You didn't find me," Jacob said quietly. "You've been lying this whole time, haven't you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Elaine's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Jacob continued, his voice gaining strength. "I called the adoption agency while I was away. They have no record of you. You're not my biological mother, are you?" Elaine's composure shattered completely. "No, you can't take him from me again." She lunged forward, her hands clawing at Jacob. I reacted instinctively, stepping between them. Elaine's nails raked across my arm, drawing blood. Jacob pulled me back, pushing Elaine away. "That's it," he growled, reaching for his phone. "I'm calling the police." Elaine's eyes darted wildly between us. "You wouldn't dare. I'll tell them you attacked me. Who do you think they'll believe? A sweet, helpless old lady, or you two?" My blood ran cold at the threat, but Jacob didn't waver. "Go ahead. We have security cameras in the hallway. They'll show exactly what happened." The fight seemed to drain out of Elaine. She sagged against the doorframe, suddenly looking every bit her age. "Please," she whispered, "don't send me away. I have no one else." For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in Jacob's eyes. I squeezed his hand, reminding him of everything we'd been through. Jacob took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, but you need help. Professional help. We can't provide that, and we can't let you continue to hurt us." As Jacob dialed 911, I watched Elaine crumple to the floor, her sobs echoing in the hallway. Despite everything, I felt a pang of pity. But as I looked at Jacob, his face set with determination, I knew we were making the right choice. When he hung up, Jacob turned to me. "Beth, I'm so sorry for everything, but I promise you it ends today. We're going to start fresh, just the two of us." I nodded, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. As we waited for the police to arrive, I realized this was just the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. One without Elaine, but full of challenges we'd have to face together. I breathed in the crisp morning air, savoring the peace of our new neighborhood. It had been 3 months since we'd moved, leaving behind the chaos Elaine had brought into our lives. Jacob and I were finally settling into a routine, our wedding plans back on track. As I sipped my coffee on our small balcony, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Beth?" The voice sent chills down my spine. "Elaine, how did you get this number?" I demanded, my hand shaking. "Oh, darling, did you really think you could hide from me?" Elaine's voice dripped with malice. "I know everything, including your little indiscretion." My mind raced. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. I saw you with him, in our old apartment. How could you do this to Jacob?" I felt sick. "Elaine, you're not making any sense. We don't live there anymore." She laughed, a chilling sound. "Lies. I have proof. Photos. Jacob will be devastated when he sees them." The call ended abruptly. I stood frozen, my coffee forgotten. What photos? What was she talking about? My phone buzzed again, a text from Jacob. "Got a strange call from Mom. She's saying something about you cheating? Call me ASAP." Panic gripped me. I dialed Jacob's number, pacing frantically. "Beth?" Jacob's voice was strained. "What's going on?" "Jacob, I swear I haven't done anything. Elaine's lying. She sent photos, Beth," he interrupted, "of you and some guy entering our old apartment yesterday." My mind whirled. "That's impossible. I haven't been there in months. Jacob, you have to believe me." There was a long pause. "I want to, Beth, but these photos—" "Listen to me," I pleaded. "Go to the apartment. Talk to the new tenants. They'll tell you I wasn't there." Another pause. Okay, I'll go now. But Beth, if you're lying... The call ended, leaving me in agonizing silence. Hours passed like years. I called our old landlord, who confirmed that a young couple, Tom and Sarah, had moved in last month. I left frantic messages for Jacob, begging him to call me back. Finally, my phone rang. Jacob. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice tight. Elaine broke into the apartment. The new tenants, Tom and Sarah, they're terrified. Elaine's been stalking them, convinced Tom is your lover. Relief and horror warred within me. Oh God, Jacob, is everyone okay? They're shaken up, but fine. Beth, I'm so sorry I doubted you. Elaine, she's completely lost it. She photoshopped those pictures, made it look like you and Tom. Where is she now? I asked, dreading the answer. That's the thing. She ran when she saw me. The police are looking for her. But a sharp knock at our door cut him off. My blood ran cold. Jacob, I whispered. I think she's here. Beth, listen to me. Do not open that door. I'm on my way. Call 911 right now. The knocking intensified, turning into pounding. Beth, I know you're in there. Open this door, you homewrecker. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. Please, I begged the operator. She's trying to break in. I think she might hurt me. Police are on their way, the calm voice assured me. Stay on the line. A sickening crack echoed through the apartment. She was breaking down the door. Beth? Elaine's voice was unhinged. Come out and face what you've done. I retreated to the bedroom, barricading the door. Tears streamed down my face as I heard Elaine rampaging through our home. Please hurry, I whispered into the phone, praying that help would arrive in time. The bedroom door shuddered under Elaine's assault. I closed my eyes, wondering how our dream of a peaceful life had turned into this nightmare. As the door began to splinter, I realized with terrifying clarity that this confrontation with Elaine would determine not just my future with Jacob, but potentially my very survival. The bedroom door splintered, and Elaine burst in, her eyes wild with rage. I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. You lying little tramp, Elaine screeched, brandishing a kitchen knife. You've ruined everything. I raised my hands, trying to keep my voice steady. Elaine, please, this is all a misunderstanding. I've never cheated on Jacob. I love him. She lunged forward, the knife glinting in the dim light. I dodged, feeling the blade whistle past my ear. Liar, she screamed. I saw the photos. I saw you with him. As I frantically looked for an escape, I heard sirens in the distance. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? Suddenly, Jacob's voice boomed through the apartment. Mom! Stop this now! Elaine froze, her head whipping towards the sound. I seized the moment, ducking past her and bolting for the door. But she was quicker than I expected. Her hand latched onto my hair, yanking me back with surprising strength. You're not going anywhere, she hissed in my ear. The front door burst open, and Jacob rushed in, followed closely by 2 police officers. The scene before them must have been shocking. Elaine holding a knife to my throat, both of us disheveled and panting. Drop the weapon, one officer commanded, his gun trained on Elaine. For a moment, everything was still. Then, Elaine's grip loosened. The knife clattered to the floor, and I stumbled away, collapsing into Jacob's arms. As the officers handcuffed Elaine, she began to sob. I was just trying to protect you, Jacob. She was going to take you away from me. Jacob's voice was firm but sad. No, Mom. The only one trying to come between us was you, and now you've gone too far. The next few hours passed in a blur. We were taken to the police station where we gave our statements. Tom and Sarah, the new tenants from our old apartment, were there too, looking shaken but relieved. I'm so sorry, Tom said, his voice trembling. We had no idea who she was or why she was stalking us. When she broke in, we thought... I reached out and squeezed his hand. It's not your fault. None of this is. As we waited for the paperwork to be processed, Jacob paced the small waiting room. I can't believe it came to this, he muttered. My own mother, or whoever she really is. I stood, wrapping my arms around him. We'll get through this, Jacob. Together. He pulled back, his eyes serious. Beth, after everything that's happened, would you understand if I wanted to postpone the wedding? My heart sank, but I nodded. Of course, we can take all the time you need. To my surprise, he shook his head. No, that's not what I meant. I want to marry you as soon as possible. Today if we can. Life's too short, and I don't want to waste another moment. Tears welled up in my eyes. Are you sure? He cupped my face in his hands. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Just then, the detective handling our case approached. Mr. Reeves, Miss Thompson, we're ready for you to sign the formal charges against Elaine Simmons. Jacob took a deep breath. And after that, the detective's expression softened. She'll be held for psychiatric evaluation. Given the circumstances, it's likely she'll be committed for treatment. I squeezed Jacob's hand, knowing how difficult this must be for him. He squared his shoulders. Let's do this. As we followed the detective, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that the nightmare was over, sadness for the pain Elaine had caused, and hope for the future Jacob and I would build together. But as we rounded the corner, a commotion erupted. Shouts echoed down the hallway, followed by a familiar chilling voice. Jacob! Don't let them take me! We froze, watching in horror as Elaine, somehow free from her restraints, barreled towards us. In that moment, I realized our ordeal was far from over. The true climax of our struggle with Elaine was yet to come, and it would determine the course of our lives forever. Time seemed to slow as Elaine charged towards us, her eyes wild with desperation. Jacob instinctively stepped in front of me, shielding me from his deranged mother. Mom, stop! Jacob's voice was firm, authoritative. This ends now. Elaine faltered, confusion flickering across her face. But Jacob, I'm doing this for us, for our family. In that moment, I saw the pain etched on Jacob's features, the weight of this twisted situation bearing down on him. I squeezed his hand, lending him my strength. We're not family, Elaine, Jacob said softly. You've been living a lie, and it's time to face the truth. Officers swarmed around us, restraining Elaine once more. As they led her away, her anguished cries echoed through the station. Jacob's shoulders sagged, and I held him close, feeling his body shake with silent sobs. The next few months were a whirlwind of court proceedings, therapy sessions, and rebuilding our lives. Elaine was committed to a psychiatric facility, her delusions finally addressed by professionals. Jacob struggled with guilt and grief, mourning the mother he never truly had. Through it all, our love deepened, tempered by the fire we'd endured together. We decided to have a small, intimate wedding, surrounded only by our closest friends and family. As I walked down the aisle, Jacob's eyes shining with tears of joy, I knew that every trial had been worth it for this moment. Weeks turned into months, and slowly we found our rhythm again. We bought a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, far from the memories of our turbulent past. Jacob threw himself into his work, while I focused on my writing, channeling our experiences into a novel that I hoped might help others facing similar struggles. It was a crisp autumn morning when I felt the first flutter in my belly. I stood in our kitchen, hand pressed against my stomach, hardly daring to believe it. When Jacob came home that evening, I greeted him with happy tears and the news he'd been longing to hear. We're pregnant, I whispered, watching his face transform with wonder and joy. As Jacob knelt before me, pressing his ear to my still flat stomach and whispering words of love to our unborn child, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had weathered the storm, emerged stronger, and now we were embarking on the greatest adventure of all, parenthood. The months flew by, our home filling with baby gear and the excited chatter of friends and family. We decided not to learn the baby's gender, relishing the surprise that awaited us. On a warm summer night, as the first stars appeared in the sky, our daughter made her entrance into the world. Holding her in my arms, Jacob beside me, I marveled at the perfect little person we had created. What should we name her? Jacob asked softly, stroking her downy head. I smiled, remembering all we had overcome to reach this moment. How about Hope? Because that's what she represents, our hope for the future and the strength of our love. Jacob's eyes glistened as he nodded. Hope. It's perfect. As we settled into life as a family of 3, I often reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The pain Elaine had caused seemed distant now, like a half-remembered nightmare. In its place was a deep appreciation for the peace we'd found and the boundaries we'd learned to set. One evening, as I rocked Hope to sleep, Jacob came in with a letter. It's from the hospital, he said quietly. Elaine, she's asking to see us. I held my breath, watching Jacob's face carefully. He smiled, a soft, sad smile. I'm going to write back and decline. Our family, our real family, is right here. As he joined us, wrapping his arms around Hope and me, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. We had faced our demons, confronted our fears, and emerged victorious. Our love had not only survived but thrived, stronger and more resilient than ever. Looking down at our sleeping daughter, I knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, we would face them together, as a family, built on trust, respect, and unbreakable bonds of love. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands still gripping the brass knob. The scene before me was impossible, yet undeniable. My husband Adam tangled in our neighbor Susan's arms, their lips locked in a passionate embrace. "Adam?" My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. They sprang apart, guilt etched across their faces. Adam's shirt was unbuttoned, Susan's hair disheveled. I felt sick. "Natalie," Adam stammered, his face flushed. It's not what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh. "Really? Because it looks like you're kissing our neighbor in our living room." Suzanne at least had the decency to look ashamed. She grabbed her purse, muttering, "I should go," as she rushed past me. I didn't stop her. My eyes were fixed on Adam, the man I'd loved and trusted for 30 years. He stood there, fumbling with his shirt buttons, unable to meet my gaze. "How long?" I demanded, my voice steadier now, fueled by a rising anger. Adam sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Natalie, please. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness." "Don't lie to me," I snapped. "How long?" He hesitated, then mumbled, "A few months." The room spun. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "Months? While I've been at the hospital with Mom every day, you've been with her?" Adam took a step toward me, his hand outstretched. "Honey, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." I recoiled from his touch. Don't you dare touch me." The shrill ring of the telephone cut through the tension. I answered it mechanically, grateful for the distraction. "Hello? Natalie? It's Kathy." My aunt's warm voice was tinged with concern. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" I glanced at Adam, who was watching me anxiously. I'm not sure, Aunt Kathy. Can I call you back later?" "Of course, dear. I just wanted to check on you. Give your mother my love when you visit today." I hung up, my mind reeling. Mom, the hospital. How could I face all of this? Adam cleared his throat. "Nat, we need to talk about this." I shook my head, grabbing my purse from the hall table. "Not now. I can't even look at you right now." "Where are you going?" He sounded panicked. "To see Mom," I replied, my hand on the doorknob. "Don't wait up." I slammed the door behind me, not caring what the neighbors might think. Let them talk. My perfectly manicured life had just imploded, and I couldn't bring myself to care about appearances. As I drove to the hospital, my mind raced. How had I not seen this coming? Had I been so wrapped up in Mom's illness that I'd missed the signs, or had I simply trusted Adam too much? I parked in the familiar lot, taking a moment to compose myself before heading inside. Mom didn't need to see me like this. She had enough to worry about. The antiseptic smell hit me as I entered the oncology ward. I plastered on a smile, nodding to the nurses I'd come to know so well over the past months. "Hi, Mom," I said softly, entering her room. She turned her head, her smile weak but genuine. "Natalie, sweetheart, I was hoping you'd come today." I sat beside her bed, taking her frail hand in mine. "Of course, how are you feeling?" She studied my face, her brow furrowing. "The question is, how are you feeling? You look upset." I should have known I couldn't hide anything from her. Even now, sick as she was, she could read me like a book. "It's nothing, Mom," I lied. "Just a little tired." She squeezed my hand. "Natalie Elizabeth, don't you lie to your mother. What's wrong?" I felt tears welling up, threatening to spill over. How could I tell her? How could I add to her burdens? But as I looked into her concerned eyes, I knew I couldn't keep this from her. She'd always been my rock, my confidant. Even now, she was trying to take care of me. "Oh, Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's Adam. I think he's having an affair." The hospital corridor seemed endless as I made my way to the cafeteria. My conversation with Mom had left me drained, but her words echoed in my mind. "Don't let this define you, Natalie. You're stronger than you know." I spotted Aunt Kathy at our usual table, her silver hair gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. She waved me over, concern etched on her face. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "You look like you've been through the ringer." I sank into the chair opposite her, fighting back tears. "It's Adam," I confessed. "I caught him with Susan." Aunt Kathy's eyes widened. "Our neighbor Susan? That hussy." Despite everything, I couldn't help but chuckle at her indignation. "It gets worse," I continued. It's been going on for months. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I'm so sorry, Natalie. What are you going to do? I shook my head, uncertainty washing over me. I don't know. I can't even think straight with everything going on with Mom. How is she doing? Aunt Kathy asked softly. Not good, I admitted. The doctors say it's just a matter of time now. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all pressing down on us. Then Aunt Kathy straightened up, a determined look in her eye. Well, we can't change what's happening with your mother, she said firmly, but we can deal with that rat bastard you call a husband. I couldn't help but smile at her fiery spirit. What do you suggest? First, we need to find out exactly what's been going on, she said, leaning in conspiratorially, and I think I know just how to do it. Before she could elaborate, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Adam. We need to talk. Please come home. I showed Aunt Kathy the message, my stomach churning. Go, she urged. But remember, you hold the cards now. Don't let him off easy. With a deep breath, I headed home, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Susan's curtains twitching. Let her watch, I thought bitterly. Adam was waiting in the living room, pacing nervously. He looked up as I entered, his face a mask of remorse. Natalie, I'm so sorry, he began. I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I held up a hand, silencing him. Save it, Adam. I don't want to hear your excuses. He deflated, sinking onto the couch. What can I do? How can I make this right? I laughed humorlessly. Make it right? You've been sleeping with our neighbor for months. While I've been taking care of my dying mother, you've been... God, I can't even say it. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm a bastard, but I love you, Natalie. We can get through this. As I opened my mouth to respond, my phone rang. It was the hospital. Mrs. Henderson, it's about your mother. You need to come quickly. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I grabbed my purse, heading for the door. Natalie? Adam called after me. What's wrong? It's Mom, I said, my voice hollow. I have to go. He stood, reaching for his keys. I'll drive you. I hesitated for a moment, torn between my anger and my need for support. Finally, I nodded. The drive to the hospital was tense, filled with unspoken words and simmering emotions. As we rushed through the corridors, I pushed aside thoughts of Adam's betrayal. Mom needed me now. We found Aunt Kathy outside Mom's room, her eyes red-rimmed. Oh, Natalie, she said, pulling me close. The doctor says it won't be long now. I entered the room, Adam trailing behind. Mom lay still, her breathing labored. I took her hand, fighting back tears. I'm here, Mom, I whispered. I'm right here. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with effort. Natalie, she breathed, my brave girl. I felt Adam's hand on my shoulder, a gesture of comfort I both craved and resented. Mom's gaze shifted to him, a frown creasing her brow. Adam, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. You take care of my daughter, you hear me? No more foolishness. Adam and I exchanged shocked glances. How did she know? Before we could respond, Mom's eyes closed, her breathing becoming more erratic. The monitor beside her bed began to beep urgently. As nurses rushed in, I felt my world crumbling around me. In that moment, caught between my dying mother and my unfaithful husband, I realized nothing would ever be the same again. The days following Mom's funeral passed in a blur. I moved through our house like a ghost, barely speaking to Adam. He tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to discuss our problems. Not yet. One afternoon, I was sorting through Mom's belongings when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Elaine, Adam's mother, standing there with a sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Natalie, dear, she cooed, pulling me into an unwanted hug. I'm so sorry for your loss. I stiffened, but forced myself to be polite. Thank you, Elaine. Please come in. As we settled in the living room, Elaine's gaze darted around, assessing. How are you holding up? She asked, her voice dripping with false concern. As well as can be expected, I replied curtly. She nodded, then leaned forward. Listen, dear, I hate to bring this up at such a difficult time, but I was wondering if Adam mentioned anything about helping me with a little financial matter? I blinked, caught off guard. Financial matter? Oh, it's nothing really, she said, waving a manicured hand. Just a small loan. Adam usually handles these things for me. Before I could respond, Adam walked in. His eyes widened at the sight of his mother. Mom, what are you doing here? Elaine turned to him, her smile widening. Adam, Darling, I was just talking to Natalie about that little loan we discussed. I looked between them, confusion turning to suspicion. What loan? Adam shifted uncomfortably. It's nothing, Nat, just a small amount to help Mom with some bills. How small? I pressed. Elaine laughed nervously. Oh, just a trifle, 50,000 or so. My jaw dropped. $50,000? Adam, we can't afford that. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. It's fine, Natalie. I've got it covered. Covered how? I demanded, my voice rising. We're still paying off the second mortgage we took out for Mom's medical bills. Elaine stood, smoothing her skirt. Well, I can see this is a bad time. Adam, dear, why don't you call me later to discuss the details? As she hurried out, I turned to Adam, fury building inside me. What the hell is going on? First Susan, now secret loans to your mother? Adam sighed heavily. It's complicated, Nat. Mom's been having some financial troubles lately. And that's our problem, why? I snapped. We have our own bills to worry about. She's family, Adam argued weakly. I laughed bitterly. Family? Where was she when my mother was dying, when we were drowning in hospital bills? Adam's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face paling. I have to take this, he muttered, stepping out of the room. I followed, my suspicion growing. As he spoke, in hushed tones, I caught snippets of the conversation. No, I can't get more right now. I know, but Natalie's asking questions. Just give me some time. When he hung up, I was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. Who was that? Adam jumped, guilt flashing across his face. Nobody, just work stuff. Don't lie to me, I hissed. Not again. What are you hiding, Adam? He slumped against the wall, suddenly looking older than his years. I'm in trouble, Nat. Nat, he whispered. Big trouble. My heart raced. What kind of trouble? Adam opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by another knock at the door. We exchanged glances before I went to answer it. Two men in suits stood on our porch, their expressions grim. Mrs. Henderson, one asked. I'm Detective Johnson. This is Detective Martinez. We need to speak with your husband. I felt the blood drain from my face. What's this about? Detective Johnson's eyes hardened. Ma'am, we have reason to believe your husband may be involved in a significant financial fraud scheme. We have a warrant for his arrest. As Adam appeared behind me, his face ashen, I realized that my world, already shaken by his infidelity and my mother's death, was about to crumble completely. The man I thought I knew, the life I thought we had built together, was nothing but a house of cards, and now it was all falling down around me. The house felt like a prison. Every room held memories of the life I thought I had, now tainted by Adam's betrayals. It had been a week since his arrest, and I was still reeling from the revelations that followed. I paced the living room, my mind racing. The sound of the doorbell made me jump. I opened it to find Susan standing there, looking uncomfortable. Natalie, I need to talk to you, she said, her voice trembling. I almost slammed the door in her face, but curiosity got the better of me. Make it quick, I snapped, stepping aside to let her in. Suzanne perched on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands. I'm so sorry about everything. I never meant for it to go this far. This far? I laughed bitterly. You mean sleeping with my husband wasn't the end goal? She flinched. No, it's complicated. Adam, he was using me. I froze. What do you mean? Susan took a deep breath. He needed information about my work at the bank. Said it was for a big investment opportunity. I thought he loved me. My head spun. You gave him confidential information? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know he was using it for fraud. I swear, Natalie, I had no idea. As Susan sobbed, my phone rang. It was Elaine. I answered, my patience wearing thin. Natalie, dear, Elaine's saccharine voice grated on my nerves. I hope you've reconsidered that loan. With Adam's situation, I'm sure you could use the money back. I gritted my teeth. What are you talking about, Elaine? What money? There was a pause. The money Adam's been sending me, of course, for my new condo. My blood ran cold. How much exactly has Adam been sending you? Oh, about $500,000 over the past year, Elaine said casually. But don't worry. I'm sure once this misunderstanding with the police is cleared up, he'll be able to send the rest. I ended the call, my hands shaking. $500,000. Our life savings, gone. Suzanne was staring at me, her eyes wide. Natalie, I'm so sorry. I never meant. Get out, I hissed. Get out of my house and stay away from my family. As soon as she left, I called Aunt Kathy. I need your help, I said, my voice breaking. Everything's falling apart. An hour later, Aunt Kathy arrived, armed with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. As I poured out the whole sordid story, she listened intently, her face growing grimmer by the minute. "Oh, honey," she sighed when I finished. "What a mess, but we'll figure this out together." I took a shaky breath. I don't even know where to start. The house is mortgaged to the hilt, our savings are gone, and now there's this fraud investigation. Aunt Kathy's eyes narrowed. "First things first, we need to protect you and your assets. Tomorrow, we're going to see my lawyer friend, Sarah. She specializes in cases like this." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Detective Johnson. We need to speak with you regarding your husband's case. Please come to the station tomorrow at 10 a.m. I showed Aunt Kathy the message, panic rising in my chest. She squeezed my hand. "I'm coming with you. You're not facing this alone." As we sat there, planning our next moves, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. My world had been shattered, but I was still standing, and I'd be damned if I let Adam's mistakes drag me down with him. "Aunt Kathy," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think it's time I learned exactly what's been going on. No more secrets, no more lies. I need to know everything, even if it hurts." She nodded, a fierce pride in her eyes. "That's my girl. We'll get to the bottom of this, and then we'll figure out how to rebuild your life, on your terms this time." As the evening wore on, I steeled myself for the battles ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt ready to face them head-on. The police station was a hive of activity as Aunt Kathy and I made our way to Detective Johnson's office. My palms were sweaty, and my heart raced. What more could they possibly want from me? Detective Johnson greeted us with a grim expression. "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for coming. We've uncovered some troubling information about your husband's activities." I braced myself. "What kind of information?" He slid a folder across the desk. "It appears Adam was involved in a complex embezzlement scheme. We've traced large sums of money moving through various accounts, including one in your mother-in-law's name." My head spun. "Elaine? She's involved in this too?" "We're not sure of the extent of her involvement yet," he replied, "but we need to ask you some questions about a recent property purchase she made." As the detective questioned me about Elaine's new condo, a sick feeling grew in my stomach. How could I have been so blind? Aunt Kathy squeezed my hand supportively as I answered each question as honestly as I could. When we finally left the station, I felt drained. "We need to confront Elaine," I said, my voice shaking with anger and exhaustion. Aunt Kathy nodded. "I'm right beside you, honey." We drove to Elaine's new condo, my mind racing with all the revelations of the past few weeks. As we approached her door, I heard raised voices inside. "You promised me this would work out." Elaine's shrill voice carried through the door. "Now what am I supposed to do?" A man's voice responded, too low to make out the words. I knocked firmly, my heart pounding. The voices inside went silent. After a moment, Elaine opened the door, her face flushed. "Natalie, what are you doing here?" I pushed past her into the living room, Aunt Kathy closed behind. A man I didn't recognize stood by the window, looking uncomfortable. "Who's this?" I demanded. Elaine's eyes darted between us. "Just a friend, Natalie. This really isn't a good time." "No, I think it's the perfect time," I interrupted. "The police just questioned me about this condo, Elaine. What's really going on here?" The man by the window cleared his throat. "I should go," he muttered, heading for the door. "Wait," I called out. "Are you involved in Adam's scheme, too?" He froze, then slowly turned back. "Look, lady, I don't know anything about any scheme. I'm just the real estate agent who sold this place to Mrs. Henderson." Elaine's face had gone pale. "Natalie, please let me explain." But I was beyond listening. "Explain what? How you and Adam stole my mother's inheritance? How you've been lying to me for months?" Tears welled up in Elaine's eyes. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. Adam said he had a foolproof investment plan. We were going to make so much money." The real estate agent took advantage of the commotion to slip out, leaving us alone with Elaine. Aunt Kathy stepped forward, her voice steel. "How much did you know about Adam's illegal activities, Elaine?" Elaine collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. "I didn't know it was illegal. I swear." Adam just said he needed my help to move some money around. He promised we'd all be rich. I felt sick. And my mother's inheritance? Was that part of the plan too? Elaine nodded miserably. Adam said once your mother passed, we'd have even more to invest. I'm sorry, Natalie. I never meant for it to go this far. As I stood there, staring at my sobbing mother-in-law, a strange calm settled over me. In that moment, I realized I had a choice to make. I could let this betrayal consume me, or I could use it as fuel to rebuild my life on my own terms. I turned to Aunt Kathy, my voice steady. I want to see Mom's lawyer tomorrow. It's time I took control of my own future. Aunt Kathy nodded, a proud smile on her face. That's my girl. As we left Elaine's condo, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, with the strength and resilience my mother had always seen in me. The day of Mom's will reading arrived, bringing with it a storm of emotions. As I sat in the lawyer's office, Aunt Kathy beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Mr. Goldstein, Mom's attorney, cleared his throat. Before we begin, I want to express my condolences, Natalie. Your mother was a remarkable woman. I nodded, fighting back tears. Thank you. She really was. He opened a thick folder. Now, let's proceed with the reading of Elizabeth Henderson's last will and testament. As Mr. Goldstein read through the legal jargon, my mind wandered to all the recent upheavals in my life. Adam's betrayal, his arrest, Elaine's involvement in the fraud scheme. It felt like my whole world had been turned upside down. Suddenly, Mr. Goldstein's words snapped me back to attention. And to my daughter, Natalie, I leave the sum of $2 million, with the hope that she will use it to build a life filled with purpose and joy. $2 million. The amount stunned me. I knew Mom had some savings, but I never imagined it was this much. Before I could fully process this information, the office door burst open. Elaine stormed in, her face flushed with anger. I'm sorry I'm late, she announced, taking a seat. Traffic was terrible. Did I miss anything important? Mr. Goldstein frowned. Mrs. Henderson, this is a private reading. I'm afraid I must ask you to leave. Elaine waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense. I'm family, and I have a vested interest in this will. I turned to her, my shock turning to anger. What are you talking about, Elaine? This has nothing to do with you. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Oh, but it does, dear. You see, Adam and I had an arrangement. That inheritance was meant to cover the loans he gave me for my condo. It's only fair, after all. The room fell silent. I could feel Aunt Kathy tensing beside me, ready to pounce. Elaine, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, I don't know what Adam promised you, but my mother's money is not yours to claim. She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Don't be naive, Natalie. You owe me, after everything Adam and I have done for you. Done for me? I interrupted, my voice rising. You mean lying to me? Stealing from me? Betraying my trust? Elaine's face hardened. Now listen here, you ungrateful little... That's enough. Mr. Goldstein's voice cut through the tension. Mrs. Henderson, if you don't leave immediately, I'll be forced to call security. Elaine stood, smoothing her skirt. Fine, but this isn't over, Natalie. You'll hear from my lawyers. As she stormed out, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief wash over me. I turned to Mr. Goldstein. I'm so sorry about that. Please continue. He nodded, looking shaken. Right. Well, as I was saying, your mother left you $2 million. However, there's a condition attached to the inheritance. My heart sank. What kind of condition? Mr. Goldstein adjusted his glasses. The money is to be held in trust for 1 year. During that time, you're to volunteer at least 20 hours a week at a charitable organization of your choosing. Only after completing this requirement will the funds be released to you. I sat back, stunned. It was so like Mom to do something like this, to push me towards finding a purpose beyond my comfortable life. Aunt Kathy squeezed my hand. Your mother always knew what was best for you, Natalie. This is her final gift, a chance to rediscover yourself. As we left the office, my mind was reeling. $2 million, a year of volunteer work, Elaine's threats, it was overwhelming. But as we stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do. Aunt Kathy, I said, my voice steady, I've made a decision. I'm going to renounce the inheritance. Her eyes widened. Natalie? Are you sure? That's a lot of money to give up, I nodded, feeling more certain with each passing moment. I'm sure. Mom wanted me to find purpose, and I will. But I want to do it on my own terms, not because of some condition in her will. As the words left my mouth, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt truly in control of my life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head on. The morning after my decision to renounce the inheritance, I woke to a barrage of missed calls and angry text messages from Elaine. I knew I had to face her, but I needed to speak with Aunt Kathy first. I found her in her small apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers and folders. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Natalie, I've been thinking about your decision. Are you absolutely sure about this?" I nodded, feeling more certain than ever. "I am, Aunt Kathy, but I have an idea. I want you to take the inheritance." Her jaw dropped. "Me? But Natalie, that's your mother's money. It's meant for you." "Mom wanted me to find purpose," I explained, "and I will. But you've always dreamed of starting that charity organization. With this money, you can make it happen." Tears welled up in Aunt Kathy's eyes. "Oh, Natalie, I don't know what to say." Before she could respond further, my phone rang. It was Elaine. I took a deep breath and answered. "Natalie?" Elaine's voice was cold. "We need to talk. Now." 20 minutes later, I was standing in Elaine's living room, facing not only her but Adam as well. He'd been released on bail, looking haggard and defeated. "Sit down," Elaine commanded. I remained standing. "I'll get right to the point," she continued. "Your little stunt with the inheritance ends now. You're going to call that lawyer and tell him you've changed your mind." I felt a surge of anger. "That's not happening, Elaine. The money is going to Aunt Kathy, and that's final." Adam stepped forward, his eyes pleading. "Natalie, please, we need that money. My legal fees, the restitution, we'll lose everything if you don't help us." I stared at him, disbelief turning to fury. "You want me to use my dead mother's money to bail you out of your fraud charges? Are you insane?" Elaine's face turned red. "Now you listen here, you ungrateful little—" "No, you listen," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I'm done with your manipulation and lies, both of you. That money was my mother's legacy, and I've chosen to honor it by giving it to someone who will use it for good." Adam reached for my hand. I jerked away. "Nat, please. I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. We can fix this together." For a moment, I wavered. Then I remembered all the betrayals, all the lies. "No, Adam, we can't. It's over." Elaine lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this to us. We're family." I wrenched free. "Family? You've got a funny way of showing it." As I turned to leave, Elaine shouted, "I'll contest the will. I'll tell everyone about Adam's affair, about your part in the fraud scheme." I spun around. "My part? I had nothing to do with your illegal activities." "Oh, really?" Elaine sneered. "And who do you think the police will believe when I tell them you knew all about it?" My heart raced. Was she really threatening to frame me? I looked at Adam, hoping to see some sign of the man I'd married. But he just stood there, silent and broken. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the pain, all the anger I'd been holding back, came rushing to the surface. "Go ahead," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Try it. Because I've got nothing left to lose, Elaine. You've taken everything from me, my trust, my marriage, my peace of mind. But I won't let you take my integrity or my mother's legacy." I stepped closer, meeting her shocked gaze. "So do your worst. But remember this, I'm not the weak, compliant daughter-in-law you thought you knew. I'm Elizabeth Henderson's daughter, and I'm done playing your games." With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. But beneath the fear and anger, I felt something else stirring, a fierce determination I hadn't known I possessed. As I drove to Aunt Kathy's, my mind raced. Elaine's threats, Adam's betrayal, the looming legal battle, it all seemed overwhelming, but I knew I had to keep fighting. For my mother's memory, for Aunt Kathy's dreams, and for my own future. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on. 6 months had passed since my confrontation with Elaine and Adam. I stood in front of the newly renovated community center, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. Aunt Kathy's dream had become a reality, and I'd been by her side every step of the way. As I unlocked the doors for another day of volunteering, my phone buzzed. It was Adam. I hesitated before answering. "Natalie," his voice was hesitant, "can we talk? In person?" I sighed. "I don't know if that's a good idea, Adam." "Please," he pleaded. There's something you need to know. An hour later, I sat across from Adam in a small cafe. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him. Less haggard, more like the man I'd married. I wanted to apologize, he began, for everything, the affair, the fraud, not standing up to my mother. I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did. I nodded, unsure of what to say. He continued, but that's not why I asked you here. Natalie, Elaine is coming to see you today. She's desperate. My heart raced. What do you mean? She's lost everything, the condo, her savings. She's going to beg you for money, maybe even threaten you again. I wanted you to be prepared. As if on cue, the cafe door opened and Elaine walked in. She looked older, defeated. When she saw us, she froze. Well, she said, her voice brittle. Isn't this cozy? I stood, steeling myself. Elaine, we need to talk. She sat down heavily, her eyes darting between Adam and me. I suppose you know why I'm here. I nodded. You need money. I have nothing left, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I made so many mistakes. I didn't want to be alone. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered all the pain she'd caused. Elaine, I said firmly, I'm not giving you any money, but I am offering you a chance. She looked up, confused. Aunt Kathy's charity needs volunteers. It's hard work, long hours, no pay, but it's a chance to do some good, to find purpose. Elaine's face hardened. You expect me to work for free? After everything? I stood my ground. It's your choice, but it's the only offer you're getting from me. For a long moment, silence hung between us. Then, to my surprise, Elaine's shoulders sagged. I'll think about it, she murmured. As Elaine left, I turned to Adam. Thank you for the warning. I appreciate it. He nodded, a sad smile on his face. Natalie, I know I have no right to ask, but is there any chance for us? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past year. Adam, I don't know. You hurt me deeply, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't still care about you. Hope flickered in his eyes. What if we started over? Not as husband and wife, but as friends. I could volunteer at the center too, if you'll have me. I considered his offer. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from further pain. But another part, the part that sounded like my mother's voice, urged me to take a chance. Okay, I said finally. Friends, and you can start volunteering next week. As I walked back to the community center, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The past year had been a crucible, burning away the person I thought I was and revealing someone stronger, more resilient. I thought of my mother, of her final gift to me. It wasn't the money, it was the push to find my own path, to discover my own strength. Aunt Kathy was waiting for me at the center, her face beaming. Ready for another day, partner? I smiled, feeling truly ready for the first time in months. More than ready, Aunt Kathy. Let's make Mom proud. As we walked into the bustling community center together, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I had the strength to face them. I had found my purpose, my voice, and my true family. And in doing so, I had found myself. I smoothed my apron and took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation I knew was coming. George's heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, and I braced myself against the kitchen counter. Tara, honey? His voice was tentative, almost sheepish. We need to talk. I turned, forcing a smile. What is it, George? He stepped into the kitchen, a familiar figure hovering behind him. My stomach dropped as I recognized Adrian, George's brother, the last person I wanted to see darkening our doorstep. Look who showed up. George's grin was strained. Adrian's in town and needs a place to stay for a while. I told him he could crash here. Adrian sauntered in, all easy smiles and charm. Hey, sis! Long time no see. I gripped the edge of the counter, willing my voice to remain steady. Adrian, what a surprise. George's eyes darted between us, clearly sensing the tension. It'll just be for a few days, right, Adrian? Oh, absolutely, Adrian drawled, already making himself at home by opening our fridge. Just until I get back on my feet. I'd heard that line before. The last time Adrian had stayed with us, those few days had stretched into months of chaos and drained bank accounts. George, can I speak to you privately for a moment? I managed through gritted teeth. We stepped into the hallway and I hissed, What were you thinking? You know how I feel about Adrian staying here. George ran a hand through his thinning hair. I know, but he's family, Tara. We can't just turn him away. Can't we? I crossed my arms. After everything that happened last time? Before George could respond, a small voice piped up from the stairs. "Dad? Who's that man in the kitchen?" We both turned to see our son, Ethan, peering down at us with wide eyes. George's face softened. "That's your Uncle Adrian, buddy. He's going to be staying with us for a little while." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Is that why you and Mom are fighting?" "We're not fighting, sweetie," I said quickly, shooting George a pointed look. "We're just discussing things. Why don't you go say hello to your uncle?" As Ethan padded into the kitchen, I turned back to George. "This isn't over. We need to set some ground rules." George nodded, looking relieved to postpone the argument. We rejoined the others in the kitchen, where Adrian was regaling Ethan with some far-fetched tale. "And that's how I wrestled an alligator in Florida," Adrian finished with a flourish. Ethan's eyes were as big as saucers. "Wow, Uncle Adrian, you're so cool." I felt a pang of worry. Adrian had always been able to charm Ethan, and I feared the influence he might have on our impressionable son. "All right, Ethan," I said, perhaps a bit too sharply. "Time to get ready for bed. Say goodnight to everyone." As Ethan trudged upstairs, Adrian turned to us with that infuriating grin. "So, where am I bunking?" George glanced at me nervously. We thought the guest room would be." "Actually," I interrupted, an idea forming, "the guest room is being repainted. You'll have to take the pull-out couch in the basement." Adrian's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, well, that's fine. I'm not picky." As George showed Adrian downstairs, I allowed myself a small, vindictive smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that night, as George and I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. "George," I whispered, "promise me this won't be like last time." He rolled over, wrapping an arm around me. "I promise, Tara. It'll be different this time." But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder if I was naive to believe him. Little did I know, Adrian's arrival was just the beginning of a storm that would threaten to tear our family apart. A week into Adrian's stay, and our once peaceful home had become a minefield of tension. I stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary, when George stumbled in, bleary-eyed and reeking of cigarette smoke. "Morning, honey," he mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. I bit back a sharp retort. "It's 2 p.m, George. Where have you been?" He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Just catching up with Adrian. Lost track of time." "Lost track of time?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "You missed Ethan's soccer game. He was crushed when you didn't show up." George's face fell. "Oh, God, I completely forgot. Is he?" "He's in his room," I cut him off, probably still crying. Guilt flashed across George's face, but before he could respond, Adrian sauntered into the kitchen, looking far too chipper for someone who'd been out all night. "Hey, family," he announced, clapping George on the back. "Who's up for a barbecue? My treat." I slammed a plate down, making both men jump. "A barbecue? Are you kidding me? You two have been out God knows where all night, and now you want to play happy families?" Adrian held up his hands, that infuriating smirk still on his face. "Whoa, sis. Calm down. We were just having a little fun." "Don't call me sis," I snapped. "And don't tell me to calm down. This isn't a frat house, Adrian. We have responsibilities here." George stepped between us, ever the peacemaker. "Tara, honey, let's not fight. I'll go talk to Ethan, okay?" As George headed upstairs, Adrian leaned against the counter, eyeing me. "You know, Tara, you really need to loosen up. All this stress can't be good for you." I whirled on him, dish towel clenched in my fist. "What I need is for you to stop disrupting our lives. When are you planning on leaving exactly?" Adrian's smile faltered for a moment. Soon. Just need to get a few things sorted out first." "What things?" I pressed, suspicion gnawing at me. "What are you really doing here, Adrian?" Before he could answer, a crash from upstairs made us both jump. I raced up the stairs, Adrian close behind, to find George standing in Ethan's doorway looking shell-shocked. Ethan's room was a disaster. Books and toys were strewn everywhere, and in the center of it all stood our son, red-faced and trembling with anger. "I hate you," Ethan screamed at George. "You're never here anymore. You're always with him." He pointed accusingly at Adrian. I pushed past George, kneeling in front of Ethan. "Sweetie, calm down. Let's talk about this." But Ethan was inconsolable. "No! I want Dad to go away. I want Uncle Adrian to go away. I hate them both." George looked stricken. "Son, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "Get out," Ethan yelled, hurling a toy car that narrowly missed George's head. I turned to George and Adrian, my voice low and dangerous. View downstairs, now. In the living room, I faced the two men, fury simmering just beneath the surface. This ends now. I want answers. What's really going on here? George and Adrian exchanged a look that sent chills down my spine. Tara, George began, his voice trembling, there's something we need to tell you. Adrian cut in, his usual bravado gone. It's not as bad as it seems, I swear. We just got into a bit of trouble, that's all. What kind of trouble? I demanded, dread pooling in my stomach. George took a deep breath. We owe some people money. A lot of money. The room seemed to spin around me. How much? The number George whispered made my knees weak. I sank onto the couch, my mind reeling. How? I managed to choke out. How did this happen? As Adrian launched into an explanation about bad investments and unlucky bets, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. Peeking out of Adrian's jacket pocket was a pawn shop receipt. In that moment, I knew. This was just the tip of the iceberg, and our family was headed for a storm that threatened to tear us apart. The pawn shop receipt burned a hole in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that George and Adrian were hiding something far worse than they'd admitted. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes and ears open, determined to uncover the truth. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I first noticed the hushed phone calls. George's voice drifted from his study, tense and urgent. We need more time, he hissed. Just a few more days, I swear we'll have it. I crept closer to the door, straining to hear. No, don't do that, George pleaded. We'll figure something out. Adrian's working on it. My heart raced. Who was he talking to? What did Adrian have to do with it? The conversation ended abruptly, and I barely had time to retreat before George emerged, looking haggard and pale. Everything okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He jumped, startled. Oh, Tara. Yeah, just work stuff. Nothing to worry about. But the tremor in his hands told a different story. That night, I lay awake, listening to George toss and turn beside me. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. He slipped out of bed thinking I was asleep and crept downstairs. I followed, silent as a shadow, and watched from the top of the stairs as he met Adrian in the kitchen. We're running out of time, George whispered urgently. They're getting impatient. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. I know, but I've got a plan. There's this guy I know. He can get us the money. But what? George pressed. Adrian hesitated. It's not exactly legal, George. We'd be taking a big risk. My blood ran cold. What had they gotten themselves into? George paced the kitchen. I don't know, Adrian. If we get caught? We won't, Adrian assured him. Trust me, brother, it's our only way out of this mess. I'd heard enough. I stepped into the kitchen, making both men jump. What mess? I demanded, and don't you dare lie to me again. George's face crumpled. Tara, But Adrian cut him off. It's nothing for you to worry about, sis. Just a little financial hiccup. We've got it under control. I rounded on him, fury rising. Don't patronize me, Adrian. I heard enough to know you're in serious trouble. What have you done? The brothers exchanged a look of panic. Tara, please, George begged. We can't talk about this now. It's complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. You're discussing illegal activities in our kitchen at midnight. I think I deserve some answers. Adrian stepped forward, his charm cranked up to maximum. Look, Tara, I know this seems bad, but I promise you, we're handling it. Just give us a little more time. I shook my head, disgusted. Time for what? To drag George deeper into whatever hole you've dug? To risk our family's future on one of your schemes? George reached for me, but I pulled away. Don't touch me. I want the truth now. All of it. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension. Finally, George spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We owe money to some dangerous people, Tara. A lot of money, and if we don't pay soon... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. How much? When George named the figure, I thought I might faint. How? I gasped. How is that even possible? Adrian stepped in. It started small, just a few bets here and there, but then we tried to win it back, and things escalated. I turned to George, tears stinging my eyes. You promised me you'd stopped gambling. You swore to me, George. He couldn't meet my gaze. I'm sorry, Tara. I never meant for it to go this far. As the full weight of their deception crashed over me, a horrible thought occurred to me. The pawn shop receipt, I said slowly. What did you sell? The guilty look that passed between them confirmed my worst fears. What did you sell? I repeated, my voice rising. George's answer shattered what was left of my world. Your grandmother's jewelry collection. In that moment, I knew our family would never be the same again. The revelation about my grandmother's jewelry was the final straw. The next morning, I confronted George in the kitchen, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. I want Adrian out of this house. Today. George's eyes widened. Tara, please. We can't just throw him out. He's family. Family? I spat. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie and gamble away our future. Adrian chose that moment to saunter in, oblivious to the tension. Morning, folks. What's for breakfast? I whirled on him. Nothing. Pack your bags. You're leaving. Adrian's smirk faltered. Come on, sis. Don't be like that. Don't call me sis, I shouted, my control finally snapping. You've worn out your welcome. Get out. George stepped between us. Tara, calm down. We can work this out. Work what out? Ethan's small voice came from the doorway. We all froze, realizing he'd heard everything. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Ethan, honey, go back to your room. Mom and Dad need to talk. But Ethan stood his ground, his eyes darting between us. Are you fighting because of Uncle Adrian? The silence that followed was deafening. George knelt down, reaching for Ethan. Son, it's complicated, grown-up stuff. Ethan jerked away. Stop treating me like a baby. I know something's wrong. You're always arguing, and Dad's never home anymore. My heart broke seeing the pain in my son's eyes. I shot a venomous glare at George and Adrian. See what you've done? Your selfish actions are tearing this family apart. George looked stricken. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Adrian, for once, seemed at a loss for words. I made a decision then and there. Ethan, go pack a bag. We're going to stay with Grandma for a while. What? George exclaimed. Tara, you can't just leave. I stood my ground. Watch me. I won't let you two drag us down with you. Ethan and I are leaving until you sort out this mess. As Ethan ran upstairs, George grabbed my arm. Please, don't do this. We can fix this together. I yanked my arm away. Fix it? How, George? By selling more of our belongings? By getting involved in something illegal? Adrian stepped forward. Tara, listen. I have a plan that could solve everything. No, I cut him off. I don't want to hear any more of your plans. They're what got us into this mess in the first place. George's face crumpled. What about our marriage? Our family? I felt a twinge of guilt, but steeled myself. You should have thought about that before you lied to me. Before you gambled away our savings and pawned my grandmother's jewelry. Ethan came back downstairs, dragging his backpack. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he looked determined. I took his hand. Come on, sweetie, let's go. As we headed for the door, George made one last plea. Tara, please, don't leave. I love you. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, I said, if you love us, you'll fix this. And when you do, maybe we can talk about coming home. With that, I walked out, Ethan's small hand in mine. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of George and Adrian in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway looking lost. My heart ached, but I knew I was doing the right thing. This separation might be the wake-up call George needed to break free from Adrian's influence and make things right. As we pulled up to my mother's house, Ethan looked up at me. Mom, are we going to be okay? I squeezed his hand, forcing a smile. We will be, sweetie. We will be. But as I knocked on my mother's door, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. Whatever came next, I knew our family would never be the same again. 2 weeks at my mother's house had done little to soothe the ache in my heart. Ethan was withdrawn, spending most of his time glued to his video games. I'd barely spoken to George, aside from terse text messages about bills and Ethan's school schedule. It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to swing by our house to pick up some more clothes for Ethan. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd. My car was missing. Heart racing, I fumbled for my keys and burst through the front door. George? I called out. No answer. The house was eerily quiet. I climbed the stairs, a sense of dread growing with each step. In our bedroom, dresser drawers hung open, clothes strewn about. George's closet was half empty. My hands shaking, I dialed George's number. Straight to voicemail. Where the hell are you? I hissed into the phone. Call me back. Now. As I paced the room, my eye caught on something poking out from under the bed. I knelt down and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt from a pawn shop, dated just 2 days ago. The item description made my blood run cold. Antique silver tea set. My grandmother's tea set. The one she'd left me in her will. The one I'd been saving for Ethan's wedding day. Fury and panic warred inside me. I stormed down to the basement, praying I was wrong. But when I threw open the storage closet, my worst fears were confirmed. The carefully packed box containing my most precious family heirlooms was gone. I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. How could George do this? How far had he fallen? My phone buzzed, startling me. A text from an unknown number. "Meet us at Riverside Park, 1 hour. Come alone or deal's off." My heart pounded. What deal? What had George and Adrian gotten themselves into? I knew I should call the police, but fear for George's safety held me back. Whatever trouble he was in, I couldn't bear the thought of him getting hurt, or worse. With trembling hands, I texted my mother, asking her to keep Ethan overnight. Then I got in my mother's borrowed car and drove to the park, my mind racing with possibilities, each worse than the last. The park was deserted when I arrived, shadows lengthening in the fading light. I clutched my phone, ready to dial 911 at a moment's notice. A figure emerged from behind a tree. George. He looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously. "Tara," he breathed. "You came." "Where's my car, George? And my grandmother's tea set?" I demanded. He flinched. "I'm so sorry, we needed the money, but it's going to be okay now. Adrian's got a plan." "A plan?" I cut him off. "Like all his other brilliant plans that got us into this mess?" George grabbed my arms, his eyes pleading. "You don't understand. These people, they're dangerous, if we don't pay them back." A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around to see Adrian approaching, flanked by 2 burly men I didn't recognize. "Well, well," Adrian drawled. "The gang's all here." One of the men stepped forward, his hand ominously inside his jacket. "You got our money?" George paled. We're working on it. Just a little more time." The man's face hardened. "Time's up. You know the consequences." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't just about gambling debts or pawned heirlooms. My family was in real danger. I stepped between George and the men, my voice steadier than I felt. "How much?" The man named a figure that made my stomach lurch. I took a deep breath, weighing our options. We could run, but for how long? We could go to the police, but would that put us in even more danger? Or I could make one last desperate move to save my family. "I have a proposition for you," I said, meeting the man's cold gaze. "One that will get you your money and keep my family safe." As all eyes turned to me, I silently prayed I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. My heart pounded as I crept up the attic stairs, following the muffled voices that had woken me in the dead of night. I'd returned home yesterday against my better judgment, after George had tearfully promised things would change. Now, as I reached the top of the stairs, I realized how foolish I'd been to believe him. The attic door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. I peered through the crack, my blood turning to ice at the sight before me. George and Adrian were hunched over a large box, my grandmother's antique collection spread out around them. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "This should cover at least half," Adrian muttered, holding up a delicate porcelain figurine. George nodded, his face a mask of guilt and desperation. "What about the rest? They won't wait much longer, Adrian." "We'll figure it out," Adrian assured him. "We always do." I couldn't contain myself any longer. I burst through the door, startling them both. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" They jumped apart, guilt written all over their faces. George looked like he might be sick. "Tara, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snarled, snatching the figurine from Adrian's hand. "How you're stealing my family heirlooms to pay off your gambling debts." Adrian stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. "Now, Tara, let's not overreact. We're just borrowing them for a bit. Once we get back on our feet." "Shut up," I shouted, rounding on him. "This is all your fault. You show up here, drag George back into your schemes, and now you're robbing me blind." George reached for me, his eyes pleading. "Honey, please, we didn't have a choice. These people, they're dangerous, if we don't pay them." "So this is your solution?" I gestured wildly at the scattered antiques. "Stealing from your own family?" A small voice from behind me made us all freeze. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Ethan stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The sight of him, so small and vulnerable, broke something inside me. I turned back to George and Adrian, my voice low and dangerous. You have until morning to get these things back where they belong, and then you're both leaving, for good. George blanched. Tara, please, where will we go? That's not my problem anymore, I said coldly. You made your choice. As I ushered Ethan back to his room, trying to soothe his questions and fears, I heard frantic whispers from the attic. I knew in my gut that this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke early, determined to see George and Adrian out. But as I descended the stairs, an eerie silence greeted me. The house felt empty. With growing dread, I checked the attic. The box of antiques was gone. So were George and Adrian. I raced to our bedroom, yanking open drawers and closets. George's things were missing. On the bed lay a hastily scrawled note. Tara, I'm so sorry. We had no choice. They threatened Ethan. We'll make this right, I swear. Please forgive me. Love, George. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, the note crumpling in my fist. How had it come to this? My husband, a thief in the night, running from dangerous men with my family's treasures. As the reality of our situation crashed over me, I heard Ethan stirring in his room. I had to be strong for him. I had to fix this mess George and Adrian had created. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. It was time to make a call I'd been dreading, to my old friend on the police force. As I dialed, I steeled myself for what was to come. Our family was in danger, and I was the only one left to save it. My hands shook as I ended the call with Detective Martinez. He'd promised to put out an APB on George and Adrian, but his words rang in my ears. Tara, you need to prepare yourself. This could get ugly. I sank onto the couch, my mind racing. How had our life come to this? My husband and his brother, fugitives with a box of stolen antiques, running from God knows who. A small hand touched my arm. Ethan stood there, his eyes wide with worry. Mom, where's Dad? I pulled him close, fighting back tears. He had to go away for a little while, sweetie, but we're going to be okay. As if the universe was mocking me, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. With trembling fingers, I answered. Mrs. Thompson? A gruff voice sent chills down my spine. We have your husband and his brother. If you want to see them alive again, bring $100,000 to the old warehouse on Pier 7. You have 3 hours. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in horror, my mind reeling. Where on earth was I supposed to get that kind of money? I called Detective Martinez back, relaying the message. He urged me not to go, to let the police handle it. But I knew in my gut that if I didn't show up, George and Adrian might not make it out alive. Ethan, honey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to go to Grandma's for a little while. After dropping Ethan off with my confused and worried mother, I drove to the bank. With a mixture of shame and desperation, I emptied our savings account and took out a second mortgage on the house. It still wasn't enough. With time ticking away, I made a decision that tore at my heart. I drove to the local pawn shop, the same one where George had sold my grandmother's tea set. Tears in my eyes, I handed over my wedding ring and the few remaining pieces of jewelry I had. The dealer's eyes widened as he counted out the cash. Lady, whatever trouble you're in, I hope it's worth all this. I wasn't sure it was. With barely minutes to spare, I pulled up to the dilapidated warehouse. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pier. My heart pounded as I clutched the duffel bag full of cash. George? I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. Adrian? A scuffling sound came from the back, and then they appeared. George and Adrian, bruised and disheveled, flanked by 2 menacing figures. Tara! George's voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Adrian, for once, was silent, his usual bravado gone. One of the men stepped forward, his hand resting ominously on his hip. You got our money? I held up the bag. It's all here. Now let them go. He smirked. Slide it over. Nice and easy. I did as he said, my eyes never leaving George. As soon as the man had the bag, he nodded to his partner. They shoved George and Adrian towards me. Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. Thompson, the man sneered. Let's hope your husband learns to pay his debts on time from now on. As they retreated into the shadows, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. George stumbled towards me, reaching out. Tara, I stepped back, my voice ice cold. Don't you dare touch me. Adrian piped up. Sis, we can explain. Shut up, I exploded, years of frustration and anger pouring out. You've ruined everything. Our savings, our home, our family. All for what? Your pathetic gambling addiction? George fell to his knees, sobbing. Please, Tara, I'll do anything. Just don't leave me. I looked at him, this broken shell of the man I'd married, and felt nothing but a cold, hard resolve. It's too late, George, I said quietly. You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine. As I turned to walk away, leaving them both on that dark, lonely pier, I realized that this was just the beginning. The real fight to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my family's future was only just beginning. The morning after the warehouse confrontation, I sat at our kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in front of me. George slept fitfully on the couch, having begged to come home. Adrian was gone, disappeared into the night like the coward he was. When George finally stirred, I was ready. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady and cold. He nodded, eyes bloodshot and full of shame. Tara, I held up a hand, silencing him. No, you listen. If you ever want to be part of this family again, this is how it's going to be. I laid out my terms. Adrian was never to set foot in our house again. George would attend Gamblers Anonymous and therapy. Every penny of our savings and my heirlooms would be accounted for and replaced. And if you ever lie to me again, I finished, my voice breaking slightly, we're done. No second chances. George nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'll do anything, Tara. I swear. Just then, Ethan padded into the kitchen, his eyes widening at the sight of his father. Dad? You're back? The look on George's face, a mixture of love, shame, and fear, nearly broke my resolve. But I had to stay strong, for all of us. Ethan, honey, I said gently, Dad and I need to talk to you about some changes that are going to happen. Over the next few weeks, our lives shifted dramatically. George moved into the spare room, attending meetings every night. I took control of our finances, working extra hours to rebuild our savings. Ethan, my brave, perceptive boy, seemed to understand more than we gave him credit for. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked, Mom, is Dad going to be okay? I smoothed his hair, choosing my words carefully. I hope so, sweetie. He's trying very hard to make things right. Ethan nodded solemnly. I'm glad you made him stop hanging out with Uncle Adrian. He wasn't very nice. My heart swelled with pride and sadness. You're right, honey. Sometimes we have to make tough choices to protect our family. As the months passed, I watched George struggle and grow. He threw himself into his recovery, taking on extra work to repay our debts. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild trust. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Ethan play in the yard, George turned to me, his eyes clear and earnest. Tara, he said softly, I know I can never undo the hurt I've caused, but I want you to know how grateful I am for this second chance. You and Ethan, you're my whole world. I felt a flicker of the old warmth in my chest. I know, George. We're getting there, one day at a time. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over our little family, I realized something profound. The crisis that had nearly torn us apart had also given me strength I never knew I possessed. I had stood my ground, protected my son, and fought for our future. Ethan's laughter rang out as George chased him around the yard, their bond slowly mending. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. Our family wasn't perfect. We had a long road ahead, full of challenges and hard work, but we were together, stronger for having weathered the storm. As I watched my two boys, I made a silent vow. No matter what life threw at us next, I would face it head on. I had found my voice, my strength, and I would never let anyone, not Adrian, not George, not anyone, threaten our happiness again. The old Tara, the one who had let others make decisions for her, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who would fight tooth and nail for her family's well-being. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I felt a surge of hope for our future. We had been tested, nearly broken, but we had survived. Whatever came next, we would face it together, one day at a time. I stared at the crumpled envelope in my hands, my father's shaky handwriting mocking me from the return address. After 30 years of silence, he chose now to reach out. I tossed it onto the kitchen counter and poured myself a generous glass of Merlot. The phone rang, startling me. It was Greta, my younger sister. Riley? Did you get one too? Her voice trembled. I sighed. Yeah, just now. Haven't opened it yet. What do you think he wants? Money, probably, I scoffed. Or forgiveness. Fat chance of either. Greta was quiet for a moment. Maybe we should hear him out. He is our father, after all. Biologically, sure, But he lost the right to call himself that when he walked out on us and Mom. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. I know, but no buts, Greta. He made his choice. We don't owe him anything. After we hung up, I glared at the envelope. Against my better judgment, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting as familiar as it was unwelcome. Dear Riley, I know I have no right to ask this of you, but I'm dying. Cancer. The doctors give me 6 months at most. I'd like to see you and Greta one last time, to explain and maybe make amends. Please call the number below if you're willing to meet. Love, Dad. I crumpled the letter and hurled it across the room. How dare he? After everything he'd put us through, he thought he could waltz back into our lives with a sob story, and all would be forgiven? The doorbell rang, jolting me from my anger. I opened it to find Grandma Mabel, her kind eyes crinkling with concern. I saw the car in the driveway, she said. Thought you might need some company. I stepped aside to let her in, grateful for her presence. Mabel had been our rock after Dad left, and Mom spiraled into depression. She'd raised us, loved us, been the parent we needed. He wrote to you, didn't he? Mabel asked, settling onto the couch. I nodded, retrieving the crumpled letter. How did you know? He called me last week, asking for your address. Mabel's lips thinned. I told him he had no right, but, well, you know your father, stubborn as a mule. I sat beside her, suddenly feeling like a lost little girl again. What should I do, Grandma? Mabel took my hand. That's not for me to decide, sweetheart. But remember, forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the anger that's weighing you down. I leaned my head on her shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender. I don't know if I can face him. You're stronger than you think, Riley. You always have been. We sat in comfortable silence for a while until Mabel spoke again. There's something else you should know. Your father left a will. I jerked upright. What? Mabel nodded gravely. He's leaving everything to you and Greta, equal shares. My mind reeled. After abandoning us, after years of no child support or birthday cards, he thought he could buy our love with an inheritance? I don't want his money, I spat. I understand, dear. But there's more to it than that. The lawyer mentioned something about family heirlooms, things that belonged to your great-grandmother. My heart clenched. I'd always wondered about our family history. The stories and treasures lost when Dad walked out. The phone rang again, Greta's name flashing on the screen. I answered, my voice tight. Did you know about the will? What will? Greta gasped. Riley, what's going on? As I filled her in, my anger battled with a growing curiosity. What secrets lay hidden in our father's past? And was I ready to face him, to hear his explanations after all these years? One thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The office bustled with activity, but I couldn't focus. My father's letter and the news of his will weighed heavily on my mind. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice someone approach my desk until a gentle voice broke through my reverie. Rough morning? I looked up to see Theo, the new guy from marketing. His kind eyes and easy smile made my heart skip a beat. Is it that obvious? I asked, forcing a laugh. He pulled up a chair. Want to talk about it? I'm told I'm a pretty good listener. Something in his expression made me trust him. Before I knew it, I was spilling the whole story. My father's abandonment, his recent letter, the will. Theo listened intently, his brow furrowing with concern. That's a lot to process, he said when I finished. I can relate, actually. My mom left when I was young. Never heard from her again. Our eyes met, and I felt a connection I hadn't experienced in years. How did you deal with it? I asked. Theo shrugged. Therapy, mostly, and learning to forgive, not for her sake, but for mine. His words echoed Grandma Mabel's advice, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way through this mess after all. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing. It was Greta. Riley, you'll never believe it, she exclaimed. I got the job. My mood instantly lifted. That's fantastic. I'm so proud of you, sis. As I hung up, I noticed Theo watching me curiously. Good news? I nodded, explaining Greta's struggle to find work after her recent divorce. She's been through so much. It's nice to see things finally looking up for her. Theo's smile was warm. Sounds like you two are close. We are now, I admitted. It wasn't always easy, especially after Dad left, but we've got each other's backs. The rest of the day flew by, my spirits buoyed by Greta's success and Theo's unexpected kindness. As I was packing up to leave, Theo appeared at my desk again. "Listen," he said, looking slightly nervous. "I know this might be terrible timing, but would you like to grab dinner sometime?" My heart raced. It had been so long since I'd felt this kind of connection with someone. But with everything going on with my father, "I'd love to," I heard myself say. "But can we take it slow? I've got a lot on my plate right now." Theo's smile was understanding. "Of course. How about we start with coffee?" As we made plans, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. My stomach dropped as I realized who it must be. "Hello?" I answered hesitantly. "Riley, it's your father." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of my desk, grateful for Theo's steadying presence beside me. "Why are you calling?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know I have no right," my father said, his voice rough with emotion, "but I need to see you and Greta. There are things you need to know, things I should have told you years ago." My mind raced. What could be so important that he'd reach out now, after all this time? "I can't promise anything," I said finally. "I need to talk to Greta first." "I understand," he replied. "Just, please consider it. Time isn't on my side anymore." As I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking. Theo placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. "I don't know. I thought I was ready to face this, but now." Theo squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever you decide, you don't have to go through it alone." Looking into his eyes, I felt a mix of gratitude and fear. Could I trust this newfound connection, or would it crumble like so many others in my life? As we left the office together, I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully constructed world was about to change forever. The question was, would it be for better or worse? I smoothed down my wedding dress, heart racing as I prepared to walk down the aisle. 2 years had passed since that fateful day I met Theo, and now here we were, about to start our life together. As the music swelled, I caught sight of Greta beaming at me from her place as maid of honor. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my eyes locking with Theo's. The ceremony was a blur of joy and tears, but as we said our vows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally put the pain of my past behind me. 5 years later, that peace was starting to crumble. "Theo?" I called out, padding into our darkened bedroom. "Are you asleep already?" A muffled grunt was my only answer. I sighed, climbing into bed beside my husband's motionless form. This had become our nightly routine, me coming home late from work to find Theo already in bed, claiming exhaustion. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. When was the last time we'd had a real conversation? Made love? The distance between us seemed to grow with each passing day. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed and a hastily scrawled note. "Early meeting. See you tonight." I crumpled the paper, frustration building. We needed to talk, really talk, about what was happening to us. My phone buzzed with a text from Greta. "Lunch today? Big news." At least one relationship in my life was solid. Over salads, Greta's eyes sparkled as she shared her excitement. "We're trying for a baby." My heart clenched. "That's wonderful," I managed, forcing a smile. Greta's face fell. "What's wrong, Riles? I thought you'd be happy for me." I reached for her hand. "I am, truly. It's just—" I hesitated, then the words tumbled out. "Theo and I have been trying for years with no luck, and lately, he's been so distant. I don't know what to do." Greta squeezed my hand. "Have you talked to him about it?" I shook my head. "He's always too tired or busy. I'm starting to wonder if he even wants kids anymore." "Oh, Riley," Greta sighed. "You need to confront this head on. Don't let it fester." I nodded, knowing she was right. That evening, I was determined to have it out with Theo, but my plans were derailed by an unexpected visitor. "Irene," I said, surprised to find my mother-in-law on our doorstep. "What brings you by?" Irene swept past me, her perfume cloying in the small entryway. "Where's my son? We need to talk." Before I could answer, Theo appeared, looking wary. "Mom? What's going on?" Irene fixed us both with a stern look. "I'll tell you what's going on. I'm tired of waiting for grandchildren. When are you two going to give me some babies to spoil?" The room seemed to shrink, tension thick in the air. Theo's face paled, and I felt a surge of anger. "That's none of your business," I snapped. "Our family planning is between Theo and me." Irene's eyes narrowed. It becomes my business when my son is clearly unhappy. I raised him to be a family man and— Enough, Theo shouted, startling us both. Mom, you need to leave, now. As the door closed behind a sputtering Irene, I turned to Theo. We need to talk. He nodded, slumping onto the couch. I know. I sat beside him, my heart pounding. What's happening to us, Theo? You're never home. We barely talk. And when was the last time we were intimate? Theo's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Riley. I've been hiding something from you. My blood ran cold. What is it? Just tell me. He took a shaky breath. I went to a doctor a few months ago. I'm infertile, Riley. We can't have children. It's my fault. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. All our struggles, all the distance between us, suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Theo's voice broke. I was ashamed. I thought you'd leave me if you knew. As the weight of his confession settled over us, I realized we were at a crossroads. Could our marriage survive this secret? And more importantly, did I want it to? I stared at Theo, his confession hanging heavy in the air between us. Infertile. The word echoed in my mind, a cruel twist of fate that explained so much yet solved nothing. How long have you known? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Theo's shoulders slumped. 6 months. I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I thought if I just worked harder, made more money, maybe it wouldn't matter as much. Anger flared within me. 6 months? You've been lying to me for half a year? I'm sorry, Riley. I was scared. I thought you'd leave me if you knew. I stood up, pacing the room. So instead, you pushed me away? Made me feel like I wasn't enough? Theo reached for me, but I stepped back. I need some air, I said, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. As I drove aimlessly through the night, memories flooded back. My father walking out, my mother's descent into depression. The feeling of not being enough, of being abandoned. And now Theo's deception brought it all rushing back. I found myself at Greta's apartment, knocking before I could think better of it. She opened the door, took one look at my tear-stained face, and pulled me into a hug. Oh, Riley, she murmured. What happened? I spilled everything. Theo's infertility, his lies, my conflicted feelings. Greta listened, her face a mix of sympathy and concern. What are you going to do? She asked when I finished. I shook my head. I don't know. Part of me wants to forgive him, to work through this, but another part is furious and hurt, Greta finished. That's understandable. We talked late into the night, weighing options and consequences. As dawn broke, I made my decision. Back home, I found Theo asleep on the couch, looking haggard. I gently shook him awake. Riley, he said, sitting up quickly. I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk? I nodded, sitting beside him. I'm angry, Theo, and hurt, but I love you, and I want to fight for us. Relief washed over his face. I love you too. I'll do anything to make this right. Then no more secrets, I said firmly. We face this together, starting now. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into research, doctor's appointments, and long, honest conversations. We explored options: adoption, surrogacy, even remaining child-free. Slowly, the distance between us began to close. One evening, as we cuddled on the couch, Theo turned to me with a serious expression. I've been thinking, he said. Maybe we should look into adoption. There are so many kids out there who need a loving home. My heart swelled. I'd like that, I replied, squeezing his hand. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Greta. Pregnant, can't wait to tell you all about it tomorrow. I felt a pang of envy, quickly followed by guilt. I should be happy for my sister, shouldn't I? Theo noticed my expression. What is it? I showed him the text, watching his face carefully. To my surprise, he smiled. That's wonderful news. We should celebrate with them. You're not upset? I asked hesitantly. He shook his head. I'm learning that family comes in many forms. We'll find our path, Riley. And in the meantime, we get to be the cool aunt and uncle. His words warmed me, easing some of the tension I'd been carrying. Maybe we could make this work after all. The next day, as we prepared to meet Greta and her husband for dinner, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer. Hello? Riley? A familiar voice, one I hadn't heard in years. It's your father. I know I have no right, but I'm in town. I'd like to see you and Greta if you're willing. I froze, my mind racing. After everything that had happened, could I face him? Should I? Theo appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. Riley, what's wrong? I looked at my husband, then back at the phone in my hand. It was time to make a decision, one that could change everything. The day Greta called to announce her engagement was one of the happiest I'd experienced in years. After everything we'd been through, my little sister deserved this joy. As I hung up the phone, an idea struck me. "Theo," I called out, "I want to give Greta Grandma Mabel's ring for her wedding. What do you think?" He appeared in the doorway, smiling. "That's a wonderful idea, honey. She'll love it." I felt a warmth spread through me. Despite our struggles, moments like these reminded me why I'd fallen in love with Theo in the first place. The next day, I left work early to search for the ring. I knew it was tucked away in a box in our bedroom closet, a cherished heirloom I'd been saving for a special occasion. As I approached our house, I noticed Theo's car in the driveway. Strange. He usually worked late on Thursdays. I entered quietly, planning to surprise him. But as I neared our bedroom, I heard muffled voices. My heart raced as I pushed the door open. The scene before me shattered my world in an instant. Theo, my husband, tangled in our bedsheets with a woman I'd never seen before. They scrambled to cover themselves, but the damage was done. "Riley!" Theo gasped, his face a mask of shock and guilt. "I can explain." I held up a hand, silencing him. My voice was ice when I spoke. "Get out, both of you." Now, the woman, red-faced and avoiding my gaze, gathered her clothes and fled. Theo approached me, reaching out. "Please, Riley, let me." "Don't touch me," I hissed, recoiling. "How long has this been going on?" He hesitated, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't a one-time mistake, this was a betrayal that ran deep. "Get out," I repeated, my voice breaking. "I can't even look at you right now." As the front door slammed behind him, I collapsed onto the bed, sobs racking my body. How could he do this? After everything we'd been through, the struggles we'd faced together, how could he throw it all away? Hours passed as I sat there, numb and lost. When my phone rang, I almost ignored it, but seeing Greta's name on the screen, I answered. "Riley?" Her excited voice felt like it was coming from another world. "Have you found the ring yet? I can't wait to see it." The ring. In my shock, I'd completely forgotten why I'd come home early. I haven't had a chance to look yet," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything okay?" Greta asked, concern creeping into her tone. "You sound off." I wanted to tell her everything, to let my sister comfort me as she had so many times before, but I couldn't bring myself to taint her happiness with my pain. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a long day at work. I'll find the ring this weekend, I promise." After hanging up, I forced myself to move. I had to find that ring. It was the one thing I could control right now, the one promise I could keep. As I dug through the closet, my hand brushed against a small box I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, bank statements, hotel receipts, and a letter addressed to Theo from someone named Melissa. With shaking hands, I unfolded the letter. As I read, my world tilted on its axis once again. This wasn't just an affair. Theo had a child, a little girl, with this woman. A child he'd been secretly supporting for years. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The late nights at work, the financial strain we'd been under, his reluctance to pursue adoption. It had all been a lie. I sank to the floor, the evidence of Theo's deception scattered around me. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over. The question was, what would I do now? As dawn broke, I made my decision. I would confront Theo, armed with the truth. But first, I had a call to make. I dialed Greta's number, my resolve strengthening with each ring. When she answered, I took a deep breath. "Greta, I need your help. There's something I have to tell you." I paced our living room, my hands shaking as I clutched the damning evidence. Greta's voice echoed in my head, urging me to stay calm, to think clearly. But how could I, when my entire world had just imploded? The sound of a key in the lock made me freeze. Theo entered, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Riley," he began, "I know what you saw, but please." "Sit down," I cut him off, my voice ice cold. "We need to talk." He sank onto the couch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I know everything, Theo," I said, spreading the papers on the coffee table between us. "The affair, the secret bank account, and your daughter." His face paled. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter how I know," I snapped. "What matters is that you've been lying to me for years. Years, Theo." He buried his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Riley. I never meant for any of this to happen." But it did happen, I said, my voice rising. You told me you were infertile, that we couldn't have children. Was that just another lie? Theo looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. No, that part was true. I am infertile. Melissa, she got pregnant before we found out. I didn't know how to tell you. The irony of it all hit me like a punch to the gut. All this time I'd been blaming myself for our inability to conceive, and he'd had a child all along. How old is she? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 4, Theo replied. Her name is Emma. 4 years. Our entire marriage had been built on this lie. I want a divorce, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Theo's head snapped up. Riley, please, we can work through this. I'll do anything. There's nothing to work through, I interrupted. You've been living a double life, Theo. How can I ever trust you again? He stood, reaching for me. I love you, Riley. Only you. Melissa was a mistake. I stepped back, anger flaring. A mistake? You have a child with her. That's not a mistake. That's a life-altering decision you made without me. Tears streamed down my face as I continued. And what about Emma? She's innocent in all this. How could you keep her a secret, deny her a father? Theo's shoulders slumped. I was scared. I thought I'd lose everything. You, my job, my family. I convinced myself that supporting them financially was enough. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You're going to lose it all anyway. I grabbed a folder from the side table and thrust it at him. These are divorce papers. I'm asking for alimony, given the years of deception and financial infidelity. Theo's hands trembled as he took the folder. Riley, please, can't we at least try counseling? I shook my head. It's too late for that. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You have until the end of the week to move out. As the reality of the situation sank in, Theo's face crumpled. What am I supposed to do? Where will I go? For a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy. But then I remembered the look on his face when I caught him with that woman, the years of lies and secrets. That's not my problem anymore, I said, my voice hard. You made your choices, Theo. Now you have to live with them. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of him any longer. I'll be staying with Greta for a few days. When I come back, I expect you to be gone. As I headed for the door, Theo called out one last time. Riley, wait, there's something else you need to know. But I was already gone, slamming the door behind me. Whatever other secrets he was hiding, I couldn't bear to hear them. Not now, maybe not ever. As I drove to Greta's, my mind raced. How had my life come to this? And more importantly, where did I go from here? I'd been staying at Greta's for a week when Theo's incessant calls finally wore me down. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a cafe near my house. As I approached, I saw him hunched over a table, looking haggard and unkempt. A pang of sympathy shot through me, quickly replaced by anger. He didn't get to look devastated. He wasn't the victim here. Riley, he said, standing as I sat down. Thank you for coming. I cut straight to the chase. What do you want, Theo? I thought I made myself clear. He took a deep breath. There's more you need to know, about Emma, about everything. My heart raced. What more could there possibly be? I'm listening, I said, my voice cold. Theo's eyes filled with tears. Emma, she's sick, leukemia. That's why I've been taking so much money out of our accounts, for her treatments. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A sick child, of course, because this situation wasn't complicated enough already. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered, my anger momentarily forgotten. I was a coward, Theo admitted. I thought I could handle it all on my own, but I can't. I need your help, Riley. I laughed bitterly. My help? You lied to me for years, Theo. You cheated on me, and now you want my help? He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I know I don't deserve it, he said, but Emma does. She's innocent in all this. A memory flashed through my mind, my father walking out, leaving us to fend for ourselves, the pain of abandonment that had shaped my entire life. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked, my voice shaking. Theo hesitated. The treatments aren't working. She needs a bone marrow transplant. Neither Melissa nor I are a match. The implication hung heavy in the air. He wanted me to get tested, to potentially save the life of the child born from his betrayal. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Greta. Dad's in the hospital. It's bad. Come quick. I stood abruptly, my head spinning. I have to go, I told Theo. My father, he's dying. Theo's face fell. Riley, I'm so sorry, but please think about what I said. Emma doesn't have much time. As I rushed to my car, emotions warred within me. My dying father, who had abandoned us years ago. Theo's sick daughter, a child I'd never met but who shared my husband's blood. The ghosts of my past colliding with the wreckage of my present. At the hospital, I found Greta in the waiting room, her face tear-stained. "He's asking for you," she said softly. I entered my father's room, steeling myself. He looked small and frail, a shadow of the man who had loomed so large in my childhood memories. "Riley," he rasped. "You came." I nodded, unable to speak. "I know I have no right," he continued, "but I need to tell you something about why I left." Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him it was too late for explanations. But another part, the little girl who had always wondered why she wasn't enough, needed to hear it. "Go on," I said, my father's eyes filled with tears. "I had another family, a wife, 2 sons. They didn't know about you and Greta. When your mother found out, she gave me an ultimatum. I made the wrong choice." The room seemed to close in around me. Another family. More siblings I'd never known about. How many more secrets could one day hold? "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded. "Because they're here," he said. "Your brothers. They want to meet you." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. 2 men entered, their faces a strange mix of familiar and foreign. I looked from them to my dying father, to Greta hovering in the doorway, her face a mirror of my own shock. In that moment, I felt the weight of every lie, every secret, every betrayal crushing down on me. "I can't do this," I choked out, pushing past my newfound brothers and into the hallway. As I ran, Theo's words echoed in my mind, mingling with my father's confession and the sight of those strangers who shared my blood. How many more impossible choices would I have to make? How much more could I possibly take? The day of the divorce hearing arrived with a sense of finality I wasn't prepared for. As I walked into the courthouse, I spotted Theo standing with Irene and a woman I assumed was Melissa. The sight of them together, a twisted family unit, made my stomach churn. "Riley," Theo called out, approaching me. "Please, can we talk before?" "There's nothing left to say," I cut him off, brushing past them. Inside, our lawyers presented their cases. I sat numb as the details of our shattered marriage were laid bare. Theo's infidelity, the financial deception, the secret child. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. As the judge prepared to make her ruling, Theo suddenly stood. "Your Honor, I need to say something." My heart raced as he turned to face me. "Riley, I know I've hurt you beyond measure. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Emma, she's getting worse. The doctors say she might not have much time left." The courtroom fell silent. I could feel all eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. "What are you asking, Theo?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He took a deep breath. "I'm asking you to consider getting tested as a bone marrow donor. I know it's an impossible request, but she's just a little girl. She doesn't deserve to suffer for my mistakes." The weight of his words crashed over me. I thought of my father, lying in a hospital bed, seeking redemption too late. Of the brothers I'd never known, waiting for a chance to connect. Of Greta, always by my side, proof that family could transcend blood. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'll get tested, but not for you, Theo, for Emma." The relief on his face was palpable, but I wasn't finished. And if I'm a match, if I go through with this, I want something in return. "Anything," Theo said quickly. I took a deep breath. "I want you to sign away your parental rights, to let me adopt Emma." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Theo's face paled. "But she's my daughter." "And you failed her," I said firmly, "just like my father failed me. I won't let another child grow up feeling abandoned and unloved. Emma deserves better." Tears streamed down Theo's face as he nodded slowly. "Okay," he whispered. "If that's what it takes to save her, I'll do it." The judge, visibly moved, called a recess to allow us to work out the details. As we left the courtroom, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Irene. "Riley," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. I've been so blind to Theo's faults, so focused on having a grandchild, I never saw the amazing woman you are." I nodded, accepting her words but not quite ready to forgive. As I turned away, I saw Greta rushing towards me, her face a mix of concern and pride. "I heard everything," she said, pulling me into a hug. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded against her shoulder. "I am. It's time to break the cycle, Greta, to be the family we always wished we had." Over the next few weeks, as we waited for the test results, I spent time with my father and newfound brothers. It wasn't easy, but slowly we began to build bridges. When the call came that I was a match for Emma, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never known before. The day of the transplant, I lay in the hospital bed, watching as my bone marrow was collected. Across the hall, a little girl I'd never met waited for the gift of life. As the nurse wheeled me out, I caught sight of Theo in the waiting room, looking lost and broken. "Take care of her," I said as I passed him. "Until I can." He nodded, unable to speak. As I recovered, surrounded by Greta, my brothers, and even my ailing father, I realized that family wasn't about perfect people or unbroken bonds. It was about choice, about love that perseveres despite the pain. Months later, as I finalized Emma's adoption papers, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to be the parent I'd always needed, to create a family built on honesty and unconditional love. As I signed my name, making Emma officially mine, I thought of Grandma Mabel's words from so long ago. "Family is more than blood, Riley. It's about who stands by you when the world falls apart." Looking at the little girl who now called me Mom, I knew those words had never been truer. We were survivors, Emma and I, and together we'd write a new chapter, one of healing, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family.